Good afternoon. My name is Sven Huber. I'm co-founder of Re.school. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this year's Re.school GSA forum. Today's already day 2. If you missed day 1 yesterday, you can find the recording in our social media and YouTube channel. We had really interesting discussions, and we are very much looking forward to the discussions we will be having today with a great group of speakers and panelists. If you're not familiar with Re.school, please visit our web, Re.school, where you can find all information about our events, our presentations, and reports about innovation in education. You also find a lot of information about what we're doing in our social media channels, and we're also recording live and broadcasting live this evening, this event on our Facebook channel. This year, we're organizing the forum together with the Global School Alliance. And it's a great pleasure to invite to the stage Tom Camilleri, CEO of the Global School Alliance, to share in a couple of minutes what the Global School Alliance is doing. So I'm stopping the screen sharing, and Tom, please go ahead and,
Awesome.
and tell us more.
Thank you so much, Sven. Thanks again for all the hard work and putting today's forum together. I will spend a couple of minutes just introducing the Global School Alliance. So we really started with our vision and mission around seeing the world united in partnership. We're very much in the belief that international education collaboration will only increase access and raise standards of quality education worldwide. We really are all about empowering educationalists with tools for school improvement and improved student outcomes. So if you go to www.globalschoolalliance.com, you'll have 3 options of signing up, whether you be representing your school, yourself as an educator, or an entrepreneur. We really have built a lot of the GSA following the World Economic Forum's Education 4.0 and really closely aligned with the UN Sustainable Global Goals. So the Global School Alliance was launched May of last year, and within the first 12 months, we managed to build it out to almost 3,500 members today in very close to 90 plus countries all around the world. And one of the key events that we run, the activities, and I think one of the major draws for the community is our regular conferences and events. So we will have a virtual conference, a big one, once a month, and then we'll have weekly, very specific topic-specific events run with world-leading educators and entrepreneurs, all coming in to share their perspective on school improvement and getting better student outcomes. One of the most exciting things that we've spent some time developing is really around supporting schools becoming an award-winning global school. We have an industry-leading scorecard, which I'm sure is free for all you guys to take to go and assess what level on the journey you might be in becoming an award-winning global school. Again, find that at the website. We have a couple of really exciting initiatives around Student Council, which of course is aimed at providing a student voice for the next generation that are currently in education today. It's a great opportunity for us to get some first-hand feedback on what students around the world are experiencing in their education systems. There's a number of different opportunities for groups on the site, and quite excitedly, a number of competitions that we'll be running with this global community. The current one is around some of the SDGs, and it's titled Through the Eyes of Our Students. So there is a lot of exciting opportunities actually on the Global School Alliance for international educators who would like to connect and collaborate virtually. And hopefully when the world of travel opens up again, we can go and get to see each other face to face. So it really is a super quick intro. And I will hand you back to Sven's capable hands for a very enjoyable rest of the evening.
Thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
before we start, I would also like to thank our sponsors. Without them, this event would not be possible. Fiction Express and ASW at Start. So thank you very much. And also a lot of organizations who have been helping us to promote this event and get the word out, to make this available to as many teachers as possible. So thank you very much. This is the program for today. We will have 4 different slots, so to say. We will kick off with a fireside chat about assessment, without fire though, and move then on to a roundtable following up on assessment before we come to the second roundtable about teacher training, and looking forward to the closing keynote with Stephen Happel, talking about using technology to teach and learn better. So full program. And please, if you want to share the discussions we are having on social media, use the hashtag #RethinkingSchools. And if you want to interact with our speakers and panelists, please use the Q&A tab for your questions. At the end of the roundtables, we will have always a couple of minutes where we can prompt some of the questions you come up with to our speakers. Before we start, as always in Re.school, we would like to do a very quick poll. If we can bring it up, please. It's just 3 very short questions, but that helps us always to get an understanding on where our audience stands, what are your opinions, and then we take it from there. So just a couple of more seconds. 3 yes and no's very quickly, and I think we can close and see the result. Wow. Question 1. In schools today, are we teaching the skills pupils will need in 2030 or 2040? Only 8% yes. Yesterday we had around 25%. As teacher, second question, as teacher, do you feel sufficiently prepared to teach those skills? Again, only 8%. And does your school use technology and edtech solutions to the fullest potential to personalize learning? Only 8%. So they're the vast majority, even bigger majorities than yesterday, that are definitely showing us that we have a challenge ahead. And we'll take this as a starting point for our discussion. With this, it is a true pleasure to introduce our first guest, Kevin E. Baird. Kevin chairs the Center for College and Career Readiness, is the Chief Academic Officer at Achieve 3000, and serves on the board of NABU, partnering with the UN to improve global literacy. Kevin, it's wonderful having you with us today once more. From where are you zooming in today?
Great to see you, Sven. Well, last time I was here, I was at my home in the Andes in Colombia, but I'm actually in the US today. So I'm in Florida. Very similar ecosystems, though, a lot of rain.
Very, very good. So in the next 25 minutes, I want to discuss with Kevin the topic of school assessment. Our conversation will be the warm-up, as we have seen, for the following roundtable, how to assess learning in a changing world. And I'm sure a lot of things we will discussing the roundtable then can take up and discuss and counter argue or support us. So Kevin, when I think about assessment in schools, 2 questions come up to my mind immediately. First, today Google knows everything, right? This is one of the phrases we always hear. In this context, what's actually the overarching goal of schools going forward? And secondly, based on that goal, how do we measure success?
Sure. So, first of all, I don't know that the goal of schooling has significantly changed in terms of our societies, right? Schools should help to ensure that we are creating adults who are going to be successful, who are going to contribute to our economy, who are going to move our societies forward. I think the challenge is that our societies have changed, our economies have changed. And so I'm reminded here in the US, Carnegie and Rockefeller were really critical in putting together the modern American curricula nearly 150 years ago. And Rockefeller said, I don't want thinkers, I want workers. And I think actually many of our schools and our communities would still say, well, we want people who are able to work inside of the economy. It's just that that has really changed. And so the last part of that answer is that if I can look up everything, it's not about a fact anymore. Obviously, I do still have factories, but those factories have really changed. And a lot of my work is also creative work, or knowledge workers, right? So I need to be able to think, to create. But that said, also, if I say I need to be able to think, I need to be able to create, I need to be able to collaborate, I need to be able to do this, what does that really mean? Well, there are very explicit skills that are a part of those activities. We don't necessarily see those skills in a curriculum scope and sequence. We probably need to, right? For instance, I need to be able to identify what problem is going on in the world. I don't have Rockefeller telling me what the problem is, right? Or Ford telling me I'm going to make a car. I need to actually look around and see what is the problem. I need to be able to discern what are the elements of the problem. Elon Musk has a great paper where he talks about he was told that he could never do Tesla because he just couldn't get over the battery issue. And so he stepped back and he said, okay, we're going to break down that problem to its really minute points and figure out the most expensive part of that. And then from there, really start the problem solving. So I guess my short answer is we're still looking to create better societies. We still want to have folks who can power our economies, but that's really changed. And today it's changed, especially because I don't even know what the problem is. I have to be able to step outside and figure that out myself. Did I get at what you were thinking?
Yeah, I mean, and probably if we think, I mean, the biggest change in the workplace is probably still to happen, right? I mean, obviously there have been a lot of changes in the last 100 years, the second, the third, the fourth industrial revolution. But I mean, just think about technology, AI. I mean, I think we talked about this yesterday, and we can argue about the percentages, but I think somebody said yesterday in the next, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, probably 70% of today's jobs will be taken over by technology or machines or robots or whatever it will be, right?
Right.
So that's a profound change. And then what's the implication for education and how we teach our students?
You know, I think one of the significant implications as an organization, if we think about the organization of schools, is that a long time ago in a land far, far away, we actually had a lot more interaction between businesses and schools. I mean, for instance, I just noted here in the US, whether it was Carnegie or Rockefeller or Ford or any of these folks who are literally helping to drive what was being thought about inside of schools. Today we have this really interesting separation, and on a state-by-state basis, a school-by-school basis, I don't necessarily have that same kind of interaction. I don't have the freedom or the authority to really think about what's my school, my organization, my classroom looking like compared to my local economy. And I'll give you an example of that. I was recently in the Inland Empire of California here in the US, and I was talking to a school district, and they happened to know that the vast majority of their students literally stay within 100-mile radius of where they're growing up. And so they really need to think about not just what are the jobs today, but what are the jobs tomorrow inside of that 100-mile radius. And they need to have the freedom to teach students to be able to do those jobs. So I think there's a localism that becomes very important. But today, in many scenarios, we've kind of nationalized the conversation. We've taken away that kind of autonomy, right? And the last thing I would say is that if I want a student to be able to really think about a problem, to solve a problem, to be able to analyze in a different way, I as a teacher need to have the freedom to do that too. And I'm struck by the no's that we just saw in that poll. I would ask other questions like, do you as a teacher have the authority, the independence to actually bring problems that are authentic to you or authentic to these kids into the classroom, to think through them? Are you required to have a right or a wrong? Are you being evaluated, yes or no, right? Yeah. If I can't think as a teacher, if I don't have that kind of independence, authority, autonomy, I'm never going to get there with my kids. That's my view.
Yeah. So talking about kids, my kids are 11 and 13, so they're still young. They've just finished grades 5 and 7. And when I look at their grading, we're getting the grades these days, right, at school, I get the impression that memorizing content and core subjects plays still a significant role, while cross-curricular, what we would call the soft skills or the 21st century skills like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, you talked about it, or even emotional intelligence, intuition, empathy, right, play no role at all, or just a small role. Yeah. Do we measure the correct things here, or do we need to change the assessment criteria to adjust to what's out there in the future?
We're all being tortured by a man named William Farish, who was a tutor at Cambridge a long time ago and literally created the modern grading program. By the way, not as a way to increase what anyone learned or knew or even remembered, but simply as a way to move more kids through his, more students through his tutoring program and make more money. That's true, by the way, that little history lesson is true. So is there any relationship between the things that we are assessing or grading or, quote, holding kids accountable to and what we actually want as outcomes? I don't think so. And I think if you're a self-reflective teacher, if you're a self-reflective leader or policymaker, what truly are we doing besides following someone else's very silly rule? Because that really is what we're doing. We're following someone's very silly rule. So all of the elements that you just suggested, Sven, I might look at, I may well look at, or I may well look at differently. And there are ways to assess all of those things. And by assessment, I mean to get information back to the student or to the teacher about those elements. Are we doing that? Generally, we aren't. We aren't because we are ourselves not responsible or accountable for that. And I think as a really pragmatic strategy, because I don't know that we're going to change the national structure of education, although I would love to, and we're fighting at that, right? Inside of this very strange structure that really has very little to do with what we want kids to be able to think about or to perform to, if I create rationality inside of that, I think the rationality inside of it will eventually eat the irrationality on the outside of that. So, I wouldn't be disheartened. Do I think that we should change the entire spectrum? We should. And by the way, here in the US, San Diego schools, they are a very large school district. They're changing their grading practices. I was just with the superintendent in Las Vegas. We all know Las Vegas because of the gambling. It's the 5th largest school district in the US. They're changing their entire grading scenario. So that can happen. But even if it can't, or if we don't feel empowered to do it, we can do it inside to think about how we're thinking about what we want our kids to be able to do. I literally clicked off of a conversation. That's why I was a little bit late getting on with you, where we were looking at feedback based on technology that looks at social emotional literacies. It's called Strong Minds. Really interesting stuff. You're not grading the kid, by the way. You're just giving the student feedback and the teacher feedback about how the student sees a variety of social emotional skills.
So we are grading basically, the wrong variables, right?
Yeah,
and also, I'm always struck with the fact, right? We grade at the end of the term, right? And then, for example, if I get a 70% at the end of the term of a math exam, then basically the teacher's telling me I have a 30% knowledge gap, because I got only the 70%. But then nothing else happens, right? Because then we move on to the new content because the new term starts. So shouldn't we come to a completely different way of evaluation, getting rid of final exams, continuous evaluation, that are really helping me as a student to identify what are my learning gaps at every moment, and then allowing me to work on those to close them before moving to the next
It's just torture, Sven. It's just, I mean, literally, it is just torture. Show me a high-performing organization that gives you one score at any one moment in time and says, okay, we're done. You failed there. And by the way, if you're a high performer and you don't get 100%, but you get a 90%, you might still feel like a failure. You actually destroy learning there. The work of Jon Tait says that the single most important element for a student in terms of their learning is their self-efficacy or their self-confidence. You are literally just hammering them down. I have a phrase, which is, if you don't have quiz recovery, you're going to need credit recovery at the end, right? That continuous learning. But I think part of the issue is, what are you trying to assess or give feedback to? So really good curriculum can be thematic, right? It can be thematic. So I'm thinking over time. So I don't end at this unit or that unit or that unit and say, oh, I'm sorry, you didn't get all those concepts. You're not going to be able to go back. But thinking about it as a narrative from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year. And that actually allows me to come back to those concepts as a student, as a learner, to revisit them and to also refine them over time. One last note there, if you're interested in things like social emotional literacy, or you're interested in engagement, my colleague, Dr. Paul Zak, Z-A-K, you can look him up, and we are the first researchers in the world to measure, using technology, neurobiologic signal to actually measure in real time student engagement. So we measure what's going on in the head through neurobiology. It looks like a little Apple Watch. What we found is that teachers who think about their class time as a narrative, like a little story that begins here and ends there, and the curricula that think about the entire school year as a story for that student, see radically different, deeper levels of engagement and deeper levels of success, because our brains are literally wired to learn and to remember through narrative, through stories, not these little bits. So, I hope that what I'm presenting there is a solution to think through how we would get to that, because you're right. It tells you nothing. Where in your life did anyone ever give you one piece of feedback, and that one piece of feedback led to some kind of incredible change? It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's true. And thinking that narrative really, I think it makes a lot of sense, because it puts everything in context, right? And the moment you help the kids to understand why they learn what they learn, mm-hmm. everything becomes so much easier, right? Because you're not learning some abstract concepts, but really going on a path and build something you're working towards. So that's really.
And if you think about it, I know you had we were kind of thinking about the question of elementary, middle, and high, right? And what might look different there. So I want you to think about, in elementary school, we work a lot toward fluency of very specific foundational skills.
Right.
So narrative doesn't mean that you can't do that. I like to think about multiplication, mathematics. Really good math instruction is a narrative. From how I put things together, that's addition, or I take one away, then it's subtraction, right? Or I'm thinking about them in sets and how those sets build, and that's multiplication. So it isn't as if that idea of narrative gets rid of things that are factual, or even that I become fluent. As a matter of fact, if you think about really great stories like Goodnight Moon, and I keep reading them over and over. I read Goodnight Moon to my kids, gosh knows how many times, but they became really good at it. Then they could even predict what was going to happen. So don't think that narrative means I can't master facts or become fluent at something. I can.
Great. Let's look a little bit beyond schools, right? Okay. So because we're really struggling apparently in measuring what we're supposed to measure in schools, many large companies use all these models of 360 feedback, evaluation models to assess employee performance. Mm-hmm. Could concepts like peer-to-peer evaluation, self-evaluation help us to define a more learning-oriented, constructive feedback-oriented assessment model in school?
Sure. So the short answer is yes. A couple of examples or thoughts. So for instance, if any of the folks who are in our audience are thinking about they've led something, right? And they had to give feedback, or maybe they're a parent and they're giving feedback to their child. You learn inside of that interaction themselves. In Oklahoma City public schools, they have students whom they call newcomers. They're immigrants to the US. Many of them don't speak English, and they're actually writing their biography. The kids who actually edit those, the people who provide feedback to them on what they've written, are the students in the AP classes or in the more advanced classes. And so what you have now is you have a dynamic where our learners together at different levels are learning together and they're advancing together. I think in the same way, if I think about, if I want to assess someone and their ability to collaborate, how do I do that? Well, if I'm a collaborator with them, I got to have a structure for how I provide feedback, right? How could that have happened better? A last thought there, there are really interesting good tools. And by the way, there's probably been even more money to develop those tools that are used in corporate America. Like for instance, I am a super fan of Gallup Strengths Finder. And I was recently in a meeting where folks were looking at how you apply Gallup Strengths Finder inside of a school setting. It's called a genius factor. So Strengths Finder was created by a guy named Clifton, and he wanted to see the world in strengths. He wanted to change the world that way instead of seeing the world as gaps. Those kinds of tools can literally change a conversation in a classroom, can change a culture of a school, help the student to self-reflect, and help my students to become better collaborators. So those are all examples of how I might gain feedback and give feedback, right, to those really key outcomes that I want. I don't have a grading scale for, are you going to be a good person? Or can you get along? And one last thing, sorry, I'm rambling. If you ask the employers, if you ask the business leaders, they would say 90% of success in the working world is emotional intelligence, right? So I need to give some feedback there. I don't have am I going to give you an A in emotional intelligence? What does that mean? Instead, I might say, hey, Sven, you are super awesome at creating agendas and telling me exactly what I need to do. And you really facilitate a great conversation. But here are 3 things we might think about next.
Perfect. And what about, I don't know, critical thinking, creativity? Are there models out there to evaluate those?
Yeah, so I think I saw on your thing that World Economic Forum. There are a variety of frameworks that exist. As a matter of fact, anyone here, I have my email. If you are interested in some of those models, I'd be happy to send you some of that information. What I would say is that I think you can't in education take someone else's model and just implement it and think you're going to get something that's really relevant to yourself, your community, or to your kids. So what I would say is if we take a first step to step back as educators and ask, what am I really about? What am I about in my classroom? What am I about in my school? And engage in that conversation, and then use some of those models to inform what I'm doing. So you probably know CASEL, CASEL. They have a framework for social emotional literacy in terms of understanding how well I read, because I still have to be able to read. I have to be able to read Google, right? Or whatever I'm reading, Wikipedia. There are things like the Lexile framework, which help me measure specifically some of those skills, or the Quantile framework. Those exist, but you can't just apply it like a hammer or like a pill. I need to self-reflect on what is the meaning it's making for me.
So how can we motivate schools to bring in all those tools and ways of thinking?
I think schools are motivated. I think teachers are motivated already internally because they really care about their kids. I think the person who's in charge of the building, in the US, we would call them the principal or a headmaster, literally empowering them to let that magic come forth in the classroom. The classroom is the unit of change. It is the place. It is the locus of instruction. Empowering the educator, the instructor, to really move forward there, I think is critical. That's it. I think at a systemic level, business, the economy, they are pushing, right? And I think if you're in this audience and you have influence there at that level, it's really about, how can I prepare people to do this work? And if you're following anything about the economy right now, post-pandemic, yeah, danger, Will Robinson, we don't have workers, right? I mean, there is a vast labor shortage right now as the economies go through this transformation. So we have an urgent need to make sure that the children, the students, especially in secondary, that we're developing, are really ready to go out and to do that. One last thing, Sven. We cannot think about education at the primary and secondary level and not think about higher education. And interestingly enough, I think higher education it could be a Cambridge or an Oxford. Here in the US, it could be a Harvard, or it could be the community colleges. The more static higher education is, the harder it is for K-12 to change. And I'm involved in facilitating some conversations there. We have to get higher ed to change. In the US, the entire higher education system in California is no longer accepting assessments like the SAT or the ACT, which, by the way, have racist beginnings in the US, so that's a problem. But they realize that we have to get out of this really silly box.
Rigid, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that's great. I mean, that could be a start, right? If higher education gets rid of those type of assessments to filter people in or out the system, then maybe schools can start changing on their own.
It's hard to say you should think about, you should rethink GPA if GPA is the way that gets you into university.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's just another consequence of that, and a whole new conversation. Kevin, time is up. We have one question. Somebody is asking if you could repeat the name of the research from Dr. Zach.
Yeah, so actually, if you can just Google Paul Zach, okay? You can also look up immersion neuroscience, and you'll find the research. This is technology that was originally developed by the Department of Defense in the US to measure immersion in the classroom. And you can also email me, kevin@edcenter.org, and I'll send it over to you.
Wonderful. Kevin,
thanks for the invite.
Much. I love your energy always. And yeah, hopefully until next time. Thank you very much. And with this, I hand over to James from the Global School Alliance, who will share the next roundtable. And maybe you can take up some of the comments Kevin made.
Thank you very much, Sven. Yeah, brilliant. Kevin made the same point that was made yesterday, actually, about Mary Myatt, who said that, you know, curriculum is narrative over time. So we just need to ask ourselves, you know, whose narrative are we teaching or reading, for that matter? Well, this evening, the title of our first roundtable is How to Assess Learning in a Changing World. The pandemic has forced us to reevaluate everything that we do. Long-standing educational practices have been swept aside, and the temporary abandonment of high-stakes examinations on one side and the growth in online and hybrid teaching on the other. Despite widespread recognition of the need for change in assessment and examination around the world, there remain strikingly similar to those systems that prevailed more than a century ago, and that's according to Dr. Patricia Broadfoot. Recently, Lord Jim Knight said that we have learned in the last 12 months that change is constant, exhausting and accelerating. We have to educate for change. If that's the case, then we're asking in this forum, how do we assess learning in a constantly changing world? So to discuss this this evening, we have our speakers. Firstly, Devin Carberry from Learnlife in Spain. He is the Director of Learning and the founding learning guide for Learnlife Barcelona. For the last 20 years, he has worked in different educational settings, from after school to public policy, and from classroom teaching to non-profit leadership. Welcome to you, Devin. Also, we have Angela Fairs. She is the founder of Full Circle Education Consultancy. Angela is an experienced international education expert who works with boards, governors, and school leaders to future-proof schools through innovative edtech curriculum and assessment design, as well as staff development. Also, we have Simon Walker. Simon is co-founder of Steer Education UK, a pioneering UK edtech company which trains students to steer their cognition. Simon is an applied cognitive biologist. He taught at Oxford University and has advised UNESCO and the UK government. And finally, also, Carol Allen. She is a teacher and SEN practitioner from the UK. Carol is an education advisor for ICT and inclusion and a teacher since 1980, both in mainstream schools as well as schools for students with learning difficulties. She was named as the top 10 educator for her work in inclusion at the EdTech in 2018. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, we are going to get started with each panelist giving their 3-minute introduction. I've been told tonight to say no longer than 3 minutes for your introductions. So may we begin with the first speaker, who is Devin.
All right, thanks, James. Can I share my screen?
You may, for 3 minutes.
Here we go. I'm putting on my own clock here, 3 minutes. So I want to start by taking folks on the same journey we went on as an organization, where we did something which unfortunately is kind of novel, because we asked the stakeholders what they think our assessment model should be like. So we actually spoke with the parents, we spoke with the learners, we brought in people from who work in human resources, we brought in our thought leaders, we talked to different companies who our kids might want to work for, and we asked them, what exactly are you looking for? And we started with this question you see here is, Learnlife learners are ... so they can thrive throughout their lifetime. So what do you need? And not just economically thrive, but in all aspects of your life, your interpersonal relationships, your well-being, et cetera. So I wonder if as I'm posing this, if people wanted to put into the chat or the Q&A, what would be your answer to this question? What do you think, whether that be for your own children, whether it be for the learners you work for, even for yourself, what do you need to thrive in 2030, in 2040, et cetera? I'll keep my eye on the chat as we go through that. So we did this exercise and we came up with a number of different learner attributes. One of which you have here is lifelong learners. Everybody kind of came to unanimous agreement that we want to cultivate lifelong learners. It's going to be important across their lifetimes for people to continue to be able to learn. And so then we said, okay, well, now that we know that we want lifelong learners, what does that actually mean? And so we then mapped that and developed our own curriculum and said, okay, based on this, this is what we think are the kind of big ideas, the skills, the dispositions that one might need. And so we thought, okay, well, we've got this. So how do we measure these attributes now that we know what we want to measure? So we had to come up with really creative ideas. But first, we came up with this credo, similar to the Hippocratic Oath, of do no harm. Right. I think, unfortunately, assessment gives too many learners an unfortunate blast to their self-esteem. And so we wanted to avoid that. Again, if people want to play along and make this interactive, my assessment to you on creativity at this moment is, if you were a space alien and you saw this image, what would you think was going on? And would this, of course, follow the do no harm credo? So one of our other learner attributes was this, that we want them to be collaborative change makers. And so we thought, okay, so how does one measure collaborative change making? And I'd love to hear people's thoughts too in the chat of, how do you measure if someone is actually a collaborative change maker? And so we went through this process with the learners, with the whole group that we had come together, and decided on a variety of different ways. I think I'll pause there. I have a number of other things I can talk about later about how we then report this. I can talk about the focus groups that we ran with learners and their interesting feedback about how they want to be assessed and those kind of things. But since I'm at my 2-minute and 55-second mark, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the mic.
David, thank you very much indeed. And now over to Angela.
Hi, thank you. I was listening, really interesting there for Learnlife, and it's very similar to quite a few organisations I've been in schools, from IB through to so I've been lucky enough to be in British and the American and the IB system. And I think for me, the main change has got to be away from a knowledge-based assessment system to one that isn't focused on grades and rubrics. And that is a change in mentality of parents as well. I think I was listening to Sven talking and about his children's grades, and my experience as a leader is parents are obsessed with grades. So we have to try and move away from them and look at something different, at what do we want our assessments to do. So we want them to prepare our students for the real world. So they need to be focused on problem solving through application and through creativity, through critical thinking and questioning, through global mindset, through an understanding of what the global problems are in the world right now, and digital literacy. because we have to equip them with skills that they need within the assessment arena to be able to meet the challenges they'll face when they go out into the world. Again, going back to the previous discussion, having been in the British system and the American system, there's a big difference there, because the American system is very much pre-test, post-test. Very summative, where you are at a point in time, whereas the British is more assessment for learning. So you're learning as you go. It's mini formative assessments, which is more of an approach to lifelong learning and an understanding that, like the 360 feedback, you can keep on learning, you can keep on growing. It's not an absolute. You've not failed, you can keep on learning. So assessment for learning, I think, is really important. And assessment should be an ongoing reflective practice. It should be self-reflective, it should be peer reflective, and it should be teacher reflective. And within the assessment process, more of a project-based, like the BTEC or like IB, where assessment is a collaborative effort, and you can have an output however you decide. So if you would like to have your output creatively as a film, you can produce a movie. If you'd like to have a song, you can do a song. So these, I think, these types of assessments and approach to assessment will develop more innovative, self-confident, creative and agile learners who feel as if they have something to contribute and are happy to ask questions and happy to make mistakes. And I think those are the type of people we need to have in an ever-changing world.
Angela, thank you very much. And Simon, over to you.
Thanks, James. I'm hoping, has that shared my screen?
Yes, indeed, we can see your screen.
Yeah, great, thank you. It's great to be part of this conversation. Fascinating to hear the end of Kevin and also Devin and Angela, and that there are lots of sort of shared purposes, I think, you know, and perspectives that we hold at Steer Education. So at Steer, this is how we'd describe our mission: to teach children to steer, not just drive their minds fast. And underlying that statement is a piece of biology, a piece of science that we've done. So there's been a considerable body of work over the last sort of 30 years or so that's looked closely at how thinking happens and kind of defining the process of of cognition that roughly drives what we mean by IQ. And sorry, that's what we mean by, you know, IQ, which is our ability to perform abstract, complex computations fast and accurately. And there's in the original statement that James read out, because we defined that about a century ago, and when worked out how we could measure it, we've carried on measuring it, and it's driven what schools basically do because it's measurable. But we've all known that the brain does other things than that. It's just kind of fallen into this kind of bucket of stuff that we don't have a commensurate, singular, you know, reliable, objective measure for. And so we've done a lot of the science around asking the question, well, what is the brain doing with that other kind of bundle of stuff around, you know, learning to learn, metacognition, those kinds of self-efficacy skills. And we describe that in terms of steering, the mind's ability to steer. And steering cognitively is that ability to bias your attention and pay attention to a particular kind of data and use your cognitive resources appropriately. Just to illustrate just for a second, just notice what your hands are doing right now. Notice what they're feeling like, what they're resting on. Now, the interesting thing about that is that before I mentioned that, you weren't aware of your hands. And it's a really good illustration of the fact that the human brain's greatest ability is to actually ignore most of the data that it's receiving and to only pay attention to certain kinds of data. So that's really what underpins what we mean by cognitive bias, cognitive blindness. And we need to help, you know, education at one level is about helping young people to become aware of how they are, you know, cognitively biased, and what they're paying attention to, what they're not, which is about access to learning, but also social emotional skills as well, because we navigate that road. So it's really the kind of cognitive science behind metacognition, which we all know is such a massive accelerator. The good thing about steering is that it is measurable. So that there is a way of reliably measuring it. We've been able to demonstrate that just in terms of academic grades, it contributes about 15% to academic outcomes, certainly beyond school, contributes you know, a lot more to the soft skills in the workplace. underpins not just access to learning, but mental health and social competencies, and it is trainable as well. So, along with the other panelists and, speakers, we're in the space of trying to quantify what's previously been kind of unquantified, but clearly very important in terms of educational priorities.
Thank you, Simon. And I'd like to invite Carol for her views. Please go ahead, Carol. Super. Can't hear you, Carol. Have you unmuted?
I have now.
Oh,
It's not often I'm quiet, so that's enjoy that little moment, folks. Right. So needless to say, I feel like I'm coming in from a slightly different angle, but we're standing at a crossroads. We're standing at a crossroads looking at this lovely, lovely old signpost. We are right in the middle. We are where we are now. We have been through a period, and we're not finished through a period of incredible educational change because of the COVID pandemic. And I'm pushing big time that if ever we are going to make substantial changes to our education systems and assessment, now is the time. We're never going to get, in my working lifetime, this opportunity again. So very simply, we can look back at where we were, but we're in the middle of the post, and it's really time to go back to basics and say, well, where do we want to go to? Where do we want to be? And assessment need to change. A lot of them are very fixed. If I take a measuring tape and measure 20 centimeters, it is always 20 centimeters. It doesn't alter. But if I take that spring, it can be 20 centimeters, or I can extend it to make it longer, or I can shove it together to make it shorter. And our assessment process, not in all cases, and I'll come back, needs to be more flexible. And particularly, that my passion are the children who have got additional needs, and so therefore I would argue that we have to have more flexible assessment for them. So assessment always, I come back to a practitioner, if I'm working with a school, if I'm working with a company, what exactly do we want to find out? And the big one is why and for what purpose. And in the UK, sadly, and I do a lot of work in the States and also America, and also normally when I travel, and sadly, a lot of assessment is done to look at the effect, in inverted commas, effectiveness of the teachers in the schools, rather than what the students are actually achieving or learning. It's about validation of a system that actually doesn't work. So we need to have a think about that. But then we say, and a lot of you have touched on this, are we assessing the whole person? Are we looking at the whole person, or just one bit of the Trivial Pursuit cheese? Do we just want to know if they're good enough in the brown area, or do we need to know the whole lot? And then, of course, my big thing is accessibility. We're not all the same. Our students are not all little Lego models that are all made the same. So sometimes there has to be a clear benchmark. So, for example, a driving test, that is an assessment. And we have to know that somebody reaches a certain standard in driving before we let them loose on the road. There are certain things which have to be like that, but not everything. And when we talk lifelong learning, and when we talk cyclic understanding, then that is a different notion. The keynote we had just before us talked about engagement. And of course, I'm a passionate believer that the special needs world, the inclusive world, actually drives good practice. And those of you in the UK probably know, and others who don't, I can pass it to you. The Rutherford Review for children with profound multiple learning difficulties has given us a new engagement profile, a new way of looking at each individual student with complex needs, which makes incredible sense when you think about it, doesn't it? Because a complex needs student will not, they're not a homogenous group. And we finally have this freedom to do that. Now we can extrapolate a lot of that and take it up into mainstream. And in fact, a lot of it is there in early years work, but we seem to kind of hone it out as we go up. So what are we missing if we do these precision assessments? What are we, this holistic view of somebody? for example, the speaker just before me, I apologize, I've forgotten your name, talked about the ability of the brain to tune out other things. Well, I can tell you, if you've got ADHD or autism, you can't do that. So that doesn't work for a lot of those people, and we need to look at how we work with that. If we're doing an academic exam and you're dyslexic, it's about using the technology so you can show what you know rather than what you can read and you can write. It's so the whole thing comes together. And of course, you know, I can do this for hours, but I'm coming back to this where I started from, and I'm saying, you know, for heaven's sakes, if we don't change some of this now, we're just going to have a half-cobbled change. We're going to have a system where more and more children are disenfranchised. And, you know, it's just wrong. This is our chance, guys, you know, and we should, all of the people who are here today, we should be getting together, putting our heads together and moving stuff forward.
Thank you, Carol. Wonderful. And of course, with the signpost, if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will do, won't it? So I think that signpost is a really good example. Okay, so after these initial ideas, and I'm very grateful to our panelists for starting us off, we're now ready to start with the context of our conversation. And I'd like to do that with reference to this. In her iconoclastic book, Inadequate, Priya Lakhani says that curriculum design has been driven by assessment, and that we teach what we can examine rather than what we believe needs to be taught. High stakes testing is not only detrimental to a child, but also close to useless for finding out how well children are learning. Angela, would you like to respond to this first point? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Priya Lakhani saying that, as she's the advocate of AI in testing, which is very much standards-based and knowledge-based. So I'm just quite interested to hear her saying that. I think that we need to take a much broader approach to assessing children, and whether, you know, whether, Carol, whether we do assess, and what does it look like? And, you know, assessment for me means that there should be, every child should feel successful. So every child should have the opportunity to shine. And I think that we are too preoccupied with standardized testing, with a route that everybody has to go down without having alternative options. I mean, I interviewed a couple of weeks ago the CEO of one of the schools in Dubai, and they have set up success routes from BTEC through to internships, through to apprenticeships, for every single child. So every single child has the ability to succeed. And if you go back to what was mentioned in the previous session about Jon Tait's research, Jon Tait actually said self-confidence is key, but actually feedback is key. So, you know, do we view feedback as assessment as well? And what Sven was saying about 360 assessments, absolutely. You know, 360 feedbacks, and that ability for students to kind of keep on learning and keep on understanding how they can keep on improving, because we're all learning every single day, and it's not a fixed point in time. So I think that she's right. I'm not sure that AI is the way forward to to make that happen. Yeah, I think for me, assessment is about finding success for everyone, and then we're good to go, aren't we? Because everyone's self-confident, they can achieve what they want to achieve, and we have very confident, capable people coming out into the world who feel that they can contribute.
Angela, thank you very much. Simon, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to pick up on Angela's point, I think it's a really interesting and important idea that the ability of the learner themselves to formatively assess their own journey is critical as a measure of both developing metacognition, but also kind of auditing it. So I think one of the problems of an AI-based kind of personalized curriculum is that it tends to undermine metacognition, because the decisions are being made for you, rather than you actually learning to plot your own pathway and learn from your own mistakes. So that, you know, that's a question there. I'm not actually against, you know, putting pressure on students and putting them in tough conditions where they have to perform to some kind of high level, because actually, as an employer, you know, that's a lot of what it means to operate in business. So I think we mustn't assume that changing our assessment is about removing kind of pressurized, high performing contexts, but what those are may change.
Thank you, Simon. Carol, over to you. What would you say?
Well, I agree with both of the people before. I think there's a range of assessments. I think this is my point. There's a range of things, and it always comes down to, why are we doing the assessment? What do we need to know? And I love the fact that Devin worked with the students and the parents. I love that. I obviously do. Any student who is able to use their own voice, and by that I mean either their own voice or maybe they can use assistive technology to speak to me. A very simple thing I will say when I'm working with students who are struggling is, what's your best lesson and why is it good? What's your worst lesson and why is it good? And what can I do to make it easier for you? And I just ask those three things, and inevitably I get really simple solutions that we can put into place straight away. You know, I mean, it's not, some of it's not rocket science. And like Angela said, then I've empowered that person. Like Devin said, that person has an ownership. They are self-assessing. And like Simon says, we're then giving them the tools so that, you know, if they are able and wanting to take a high pressured, you know, assessment test for something, and it needs to be, yes, some of the things do need to be, Simon. You know, I don't want an airline pilot flying me when I'm allowed to fly again, who just fancied doing it and did a week's work experience. I want somebody who's a brain surgeon. I don't want somebody who's watched it on YouTube. You know, I do want the real deal. So there are things where we need this pressured assessment, but it's a wider view, and I love, that's what I particularly liked about the keynote, as it were, about engagement and measuring engagement, because there are kids who are fully engaged and they deserve that credit for that and to help themselves forward.
Thank you, Carol. Over to you, Devin. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I'll just share what, in response to what Carol was saying about talking to the learners, I'll just share a little bit about what our learners said, because we had a bunch of focus groups with them. And I love talking to them about it, because they're so much better at understanding it, because they're the end users. They're the ones who know it best and what's going to work for them, what's not. And they said things like Simon was saying, that they actually want time-sensitive challenges. They like this idea of time plus stress factors plus ridiculous goals. And so I'll go back to the second, we do a number of things, one of which is what we call transfer week, where the learners have to transfer their knowledge that they've been building over the last 3 months to some other thing that's not related at all to it. And so it's this intensive week where they design these crazy challenges for themselves. They work in transdisciplinary teams and they jump in, and they said they love that, right? So I agree, it's not that we take away the performance evaluations that have stress, but we make it consensual. I think that's something that in the do no harm, let's see, are you ready to do this? Because I mean, to take someone who is going to be, to use Carol's example of a brain surgeon, maybe we don't get them to perform brain surgery until they say they're ready to perform brain surgery. Some other things I thought was really cool is what they said is about that it's important to reflect upon what you learned versus what you wanted to learn to see how open you were to learning new, unexpected things, right? Like that's deep to get from I think it was a 13-year-old that said that. They recognize that self-assessment is often inaccurate, right? I mean, for all of us, right? We have blind spots and we don't get it. So they suggested that learners find reference first to which they aspire, right? Someone who's at the professional level they want to get to, and then compare their output to that completion, right? So that or it could be someone who's just a bar up, a friend or something, but they at least look at that and then they can do this kind of comparison. They also said that, you know, the feedback is all about the process, right? They don't like it at the end. They don't want to wait till the end. And they find value, and we do a lot of pre-panels before they start a project. They have to pitch it to, oftentimes it's a parent, it's another learner, it's a learning guide. And then they also have what we call track meetings where they meet with a learning coach and they get to check in. And that's the stuff that they find the most valuable for assessment for learning rather than just of learning. And I love that they said this is because I think people are rubric obsessed and they hate rubrics. That they want to compare their work to other things that they've done or to the work of others, but this kind of rubric that just exists in a vacuum, that's just kind of this personal checklist, doesn't work for them, right? It doesn't feel like it doesn't drive them, it doesn't motivate them, and they don't think that that's fair. Now, obviously, to some degree, we're going to need some rubrics when it's, you know, can you perform surgery on the brain? There's some to-dos there. There's the driving test, like Carol said. Yeah, we've probably checked the boxes that you can do a U-turn. But at the same time, I think we don't always need those things.
Devin, thank you. Can I just check with you? Did you say they were called pitch panels?
Yeah.
Great.
Because we do a lot of, we have a 24-hour challenge, for example, where the learners have 24 hours to create a business from zero to pitching to a Shark Tank. And so we do a lot of that. They also do rites of passage, where to transition from program to program, they need to identify something that they feel like is a blocker for them to meet the expectations of the next program. And so rather than just kind of arbitrarily doing that, they have to pitch to a parent, right, to a learning guide, to another learner who really deeply know them, to say, are you really pushing yourself on this one? Is this really going to unlock the growth that you're hoping for? And I think that's a really great assessment. And at the end, there's the post panel, where they have to then go back and present what they did, and did they actually meet their expectation, what was their process like, etc.
Kevin, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Carol, as a teacher and a special needs practitioner, would you agree that there's enormous pressure placed on schools to demonstrate that their students are on track to make expected or higher progress? And this includes those with learning difficulties as well. Is this your experience?
Yeah. It definitely is. And this is one of my biggest problems with the current system, is that it's a very narrow focus of success. And, you know, some of my students are never going to achieve certain levels. So why should they spend year in, year out striving for something that they're not going to be able to do, and constantly be demoralized, constantly be told they haven't made the grade? I work with parents who come into annual review meetings and things, and they're met by, oh, it's another year and he still can't do this, and he still can't do this. And you know, that's soul destroying, because you're basically saying that child's not making any progress, which is not true. They're just not making the progress in the things that are being assessed. One thing that the pandemic did highlight hugely is the ability of technology and students to be working out with the structure of the classroom to achieve levels that their educators didn't think they could. So if we take, for example, children with dyslexia, severe dyslexia, because they're at home, they could use all the tech to support them. It wasn't disturbing their colleagues. They weren't embarrassed by using it, which are some of the reasons you get for not wanting to use it in class. And they suddenly found that they could do the work, and loads of the students I've worked with in families, they don't want to go back to class now. You know, if I take children with ADHD, one mother said, look, he cleared everything after the first month of, I'm not doing that because that's schoolwork, I don't do school at home. Once they kind of got past that barrier, and he realized that he could do 20 minutes and then go out and shoot basketballs for 10 minutes and then have biscuits and then do some more. Well, you can't do that in a classroom in a school. You just can't. But what has he done? He's achieved all his assignments and he's got good grades. So, you know, the COVID, this pandemic has taught us so much about flexibility of approach. And it's just going to be such an awful shame if we don't learn from it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think what you say about the space that we learn in and assess in is so important. Thank you for sharing that. Angela, as a former head teacher of several international schools, do you envisage a return to business as usual in terms of summative assessment after the pandemic, or do you think that there's a real appetite for change now?
Well, I think I'd agree with Carol. I mean, when my school went online in Budapest, it was transformational for some of the special needs boys, particularly in year 10, year 11. They were just thriving. They were able to organise themselves. They were able to do creative writing they hadn't done before because they weren't worried about the spelling. So I think, and also in terms of the impact it's had on teachers, you know, teachers who've never turned on their whiteboard before were kind of forced into a situation where they had to innovate and they had to kind of take on the new technology. So I think it's really given a huge impetus, as Carol said, you know, this is the window of opportunity to make a change for positive, for creativity, for innovation, because everyone now is, I can do this. I can do this, and it works. And those of us, even me, who had reservations, and I'm now working with online schools, that online wasn't going to work for all kids. Some kids really do thrive, and I think that we have to take that into account when we're planning for school strategies, and we have to take into account, should we have a hybrid learning environment? Should there be some opportunity for children who have, you know, autistic spectrum disorders, or if they have they have real issues with bullying or social emotional well-being, should they be given the opportunity to have a blended learning environment? Because, you know, it's opened up lots of opportunities and helped us see opportunities where we didn't see before. So really, we're kind of growing this pie. We're growing this innovation pie in education, and it's had some really very, very positive effects. So for me, the learning loss was there. However, the skills that the children learn in terms of resilience and grit and determination and coping, and the same for the teachers, has really been very beneficial.
Angela, thank you very much. Simon, your organisation curates one of the largest databases of adolescent cognitive, social and emotional development in the UK. What lessons can be taken forward, do you think, in designing more effective and holistic ways of assessing students? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Simon, I think. Sorry.
Apologies. I just wanted to pick up on the impact of the pandemic and, you know, lockdown schooling, remote schooling, in terms of our data. And there was a population of children who, we talk about schools as protective factors or risk factors, for whom homeschooling was proved to be, by contrast to, because we measure the degree to which a school is a protective or risk factor, and we've tracked that for the last 7 years across a population of 70,000 young people, who remote schooling was a greater protective factor than on-site schooling before the pandemic. So they did thrive better. And for some of those social emotional reasons that Angela and Carol are talking about, not just those with distinctive characteristics, but for some of the kind of paradigm breaking reasons that we're talking about, people being able to access technology, and so that was really encouraging. However, I would say that overall, the effect of the pandemic has been negative, and it's been particularly negative on girls, and particularly negative on higher adolescent girls between the age of 14 and 18. And that's a sheer fact. And the headline around it is that, well, both young people and girls in particular, but boys as well, have become more internalized, more autonomous, and less trusting of institutions. So as young people come back to school now, they're less trusting of the system and of adults to support them, because ultimately, the world has proved to be unsafe and unreliable and unpredictable. So there's a lot of ground to be made up. In terms of, therefore, what we need to do to recover and assess, well, I would say that I think we need to continue to track the trajectory of young people's social emotional recovery and the characteristics of how we've shifted emotionally as a whole population through this experience. It's never happened before in modern times. Will it cause a long-term shift in terms of what schools assess and where their priorities lie? Well, I think the two barriers to that are mainly higher education and inspectorates. Inspectorates, because if they carry on just looking at grades and whatever, and that sort of data, makes it hard for schools to shift and devote resources to measuring something else. Higher education, I think, is hugely culpable and hugely resistant to change, because they have the whole business model on assessing and kind of forcing schools to deliver against a certain narrow set of criteria. So I would like to see both of those parts of the system challenged. Meanwhile, I think schools can be innovators in modeling something different.
Simon, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so excuse me, moving on. Carol, what ways, I beg your pardon, in what ways would you suggest that we look at assessment for students with learning difficulties?
Well, very, very simply, if I would like a more holistic approach, but I recognise the difficulties in large classes in mainstream schools to do that, but that doesn't stop me from looking, and some of the schools I'm working with are putting into we're trialing lots of different ways of doing that. So that works very well. I'm just going to throw in a little aside, just in case any of you don't know this. This is now there's no major research on this. This is Carolina research, but the best time, if you have to give a kind of a test, an assessment of knowledge or skill, do you know the best time in the school week to give it to your students? It's Tuesday morning at about 9:30, 10 o'clock. If you do it on a Monday, even our best students, our high flyers, are transitioning from weekend back into school. All right. If you do it in the afternoons, a lot of the students, particularly if they've got additional needs, are kind of worn out. If you have a visual impairment, if you have a hearing impairment, the amount of energy, they work out, you're using 5 times the energy in a lesson to keep up with your able-bodied peers, with your non-sensory deprived peers, using 5 times the energy. So little wonder that after lunch, they're just about done and homework's a non-starter. So afternoons go, and then we all know ourselves, Thursday afternoon, Friday afternoon, you look at your timetable and you've got year 6 on a Thursday afternoon, you just think, oh my heavens, you know, because we're knackered on a Thursday afternoon. So that's not an ideal test time. Best time, early-ish in the term, 2 or 3 weeks in, Tuesday morning. So you asked me about the assessment. I'd like it more holistic. I'm very interested in looking at how the engagement profile can be applied to mainstream. And I am absolutely passionate about following up from COVID and making sure that the students who have got abilities and disabilities where technology can give them access to the mainstream exams, that we ensure that every single one of those students not only has them, knows how to use them themselves without an adult sitting next to them and can advocate for them, and that it is an ongoing flexible process, because technology is improving so fast. We can't say, oh, we've done an assessment, you get that and that's it for the rest of your school career, because something better might come along in 6 months' time and we need to move the children on. So those would be my 3 features.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Carol. Devin, your organisation put together the Relearn Innovation Festival in 2020, including the festival topic specifically on assessment and what might replace exams. So I wondered if you could share any of the outcomes from that or your thinking since the festival.
Yeah, happily. I think what's come out of it is that there seems to just be, I mean, this conversation that we're having now, there seems to be unanimity that we just need to change. Can we just please change already? I mean, obviously it's preaching to the choir at these events when people come and see, but I think there's a resounding cry for change. And as Simon pointed out, universities to some degree are culpable for this, because at the other end, when they leave university, the business side is upset. They're upset that the learners are coming out and they have no data that helps them at all understand who they should hire. And so it's been great to bring those worlds together. And so that's what we've been trying to do, is to talk with people at the other end, where whatever the next step is for the learners, whether that be recruiters or companies or things like that. And ask, what would you really need to know about the learners? And so I think it put us on that journey to start digging in there. And actually, I would love to share with you just a couple of things that came out of this, because we've been as an innovation lab, we get this kind of feedback. And so we thought, what can we do to really align ourselves? And so we have kind of real challenges. You see up here in the top right, a woman who in our showcase has made an entire fashion line and actually has to demonstrate this fashion line, right? That's something that you should show in a professional portfolio, and business is like, oh, what kind of competencies had to go into being able to do this, to pitch this, and to actually sell your fashion line? We have a learner who we have digital portfolios now, where you see this learner has actually designed a 3D print product and is selling it on his website. We have any variety of things. We have hackathons where we recently had participate in Autodesk Challenge, where the learners had to, using a 3D printer, 3D printed device that would support someone with a physical disability. And in this case, our learners were given someone who didn't have access to the use of their hands. And so they had to interview this person, go through the design thinking process, and create a product for that person that would help them open water bottles, which they did successfully. And then they shipped to the person, they were able to use it and have proof of concept. This was done in like 4 days with a group of 13 and 14-year-olds using a 3D printer. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we're hearing are the evidence that people actually want. to see as proof of learning, not of that they can fill in a multiple choice exam or regurgitate information, because we're seeing the global cost of onboarding employees and training them up as entry-level employees is staggering, right? And so we're hearing this from all kinds of places. A couple of other things that we're realizing, actually, I'll stop there with the examples, but we have lots of different ways, and we're continuing to innovate. And I think for us, we don't pretend that we have the answer, but we would like to, actually, I take it back. I want to show you one more thing here, because we have also, how do we present what learners are learning, right? So we need to have reports that reflect this. And this is an old version of what we've changed to be more updated. But having a quick at-a-glance thing that's based on what your community says are the most important things for learners to learn, to having access to a digital portfolio that you can see here, to having different kind of key milestones. What are the capstone experiences they've gone through with the rites of passage, so that we can replace the traditional transcripts that make us beholden to grades that are so reductionist and don't give an accurate portrait. And it's baffling to me too that universities aren't upset with that, because if that's all you can see is their grades, is that really telling you what that kind of learner is going to bring to your university? The kind of learners that are going to go out and represent you in the world? I don't think so.
Devin, thanks very much. Angela, your work at Stanford American International School in Singapore included a significant contribution to the IB Primary Years Programme, PYP. And do you think that mainstream education, and this context of the discussion we're having at the moment, could benefit from a similar approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's really similar. Devin's model is very close to aligned to the IB, so the primary years and the middle years program, which is about a holistic assessment of children. So you have a learner profile and you assess them in every unit about whether they're a risk taker, whether they're a collaborator, a communicator, and you give them a chance to show the different attributes and learner attributes in different units of study. And you don't have grades so much, but you have, everything has to have a global context. So you're looking at really developing students who place a very high emphasis on social value and purpose, and that you are harnessing creativity because they're allowed to have output however they want. And e-portfolios, I saw Devin had there, are very, very important, because of course if you're in an international school, the children are going everywhere and they need to take their portfolios with them. So an e-portfolio, the children at the end of each unit would do a little reflection on what they thought they'd done, and bearing in mind everything that's the self-reflection can't always be something that's that valuable, particularly a 7-year-old. But I think the difference again is the role of the teacher. So the role of a teacher in an IB or an approach such as Devin's is that you are a co-creator, you are a facilitator, you are you can be a leader, but you can also be a learner. So it's very much a building of a community. And I think this building of a community builds trust and it builds confidence, because you don't feel as a child or a student that you're going to be seen as giving a wrong answer. So you're developing your understanding of the world within a framework. So it's not just, you just don't go off and do what you like. You have you agree a central statement you're going to look into and inquire. And we used to follow the Kath Murdoch inquiry model. So we had a model that everyone followed, so they knew where they were going. But these kinds of inquiry model skills, as Devin's shown you at Learnlife, are really developing those critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, an understanding of global context and what's going on in the world, and real world issues. So everything is always contextualized with problems that we have in the real world. And we can all find anything we want on Google. We can find as much knowledge as we want on Google, but we need to find solutions to real world problems. And it's only by introducing those into the framework of your curriculum that you're going to find those, and children and students are going to start talking about them. So absolutely, I think every school should be following a similar project-based model as Devin's or IB, because it's the only way we're going to move away from standardized grading, that's standardized assessments. And for goodness sake, let's use technology for assessments. The IB MYP downloads all of your assessment onto a laptop. You have a video in your science lab. You can just type it in. So all of those children with special needs who can't handwrite, who can't spell, it doesn't matter. And they can have as much time as they want, and they can actually come back to the exam and do it later if they run out of time. So it's a real world situation where you're collaborating and you're really coming up with solutions to challenges, and it's real. I think real world ready is really important for all of our kids.
Angela, thank you so much. Here. Now we've run a bit short on time, so I'm going to move to the last part. Before we come to the questions from our audience, I'd like to ask each of you for one idea, one sentence on what each of us could do tomorrow that would help our school or institution to improve assessment. What do you think, Devin, to start with you? One sentence.
Co-create, work with the different stakeholders, do it together. Stop, get out of the ivory tower. Come down and talk to the people who are going to be impacted by this. Sorry, that was a variety of short sentences, but I think they added up to a compound, complex sentence in the end.
Angela.
I would get rid of high stakes, PISA rankings, government rankings, everything that makes teachers nervous, parents nervous, and children nervous.
Fantastic, thank you. Simon.
I think I've tried to frame a different conversation within the school and within parents and say, you know, we've done a really great job of teaching children to drive their minds fast, but what about teaching them to steer? And literally throw that out there as a question. You know, how interested would you be if our school really focused on teaching and then measuring how children are developing that ability to steer?
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. And Carol. Oh, unmute.
Sorry. Learn how to listen. And that sounds incredibly simple, but in fact, education teachers are very, very bad at listening. They think they're listening, but they're listening for what they want to hear. They've usually got a preconceived idea of what they want that child to be saying or answering. If the child comes in with something from left field, it sometimes throws them. So, and learn to listen to the whole child. The words they're saying are only part of the picture. Look at their body language, the tone, the expression, the pauses, the hesitancy. Learning how to listen and doing this with your staff is one of the strongest ways of increasing impact in your classrooms, in your teaching, and that's at any level, FE, HE, everything. If you teach your staff and remind them, because they probably know, but skill them up again in learning how to listen. That's the one that will make the biggest change.
Carol, brilliant, all said in one breath, marvellous. Thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your ideas and points. We're going to go over now to Sven. He's going to come back with some of the questions and answers.
Perfect, yeah. Thank you very much for your insights. I think there's so much common sense here in the room. And the question is why things are not happening in the real world. So who are the politicians we have to, I don't know, to convince that things are really happening in a different way? We have a couple of questions. One is about formative and summative assessment. So Catherine is asking, can you speak on using the same assessment for formative and summative data? Who wants to take this up?
Yeah, I'll put that one up. I mean, formative assessment is you're assessing for learning. So it's helping you progress their learning over a period of time.
Right.
So you'll do a mini assessment and see how they're doing, a bit like the 360s, Sven, you were talking about. And then you give them some pointers and they keep on developing. The summative assessment is a point in time. So you wouldn't necessarily, it's at the end of a period of learning, whereas formative is during that learning. So you might use a mini summative as a formative during a period of time, but and you could say that your summative is a long list of formatives that you've done along the way, but I would say probably not, because the formative should be individualized and it should be really for the individual child, and the summative you would give as a whole class.
Shouldn't we get rid of the summative anyway at the end of it?
I would personally, or I think you give some creative output. So you say, show your understanding, give me what you understand from this unit, and do it however you like. But the most important thing is you have to communicate it effectively, and you have to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask you questions and you answer questions on it, because then you're really testing understanding. So that's just my personal opinion.
Maybe following up on this a little bit, at the end of the day, what you're talking, right? The formative is you also mentioned it, you either can look at assessment as a process, right, as you go, or as an event at the end. So can you share maybe a couple of more examples of schools who are doing a really good job in understanding assessment as a process to help children to develop based on the feedback they're getting?
Devin, I'm sure, would have some really good examples from his school, but from my schools, the best examples were the IB schools that I worked in, because it was a continual collaborative environment, a dialogic classroom where children were sharing feedback all the time, and essentially the teachers going around spinning plates and just seeing where everybody's at. So that is not constrained by rubrics. It's not driven by an end assessment that you have to teach towards. You don't have a pre-test that then you have to post-test to show the parents and the leaders of the school how everyone's made progress. But it's purely for the learning experience for each individual child. And Devin, I'm sure you must have some very good examples as well. And this is how your whole school operates.
I think when assessment is something that's not done to you, but done with you, formative and summative assessment are very desirable. We want feedback along the journey, and then we want to get recognized at the end for the cool thing that we've produced. We have a learner, for example, who has just taken a pair of glasses, and he's into electronics, and so he's designed a motion sensor, it's a distance sensor here that plugs into earphones for blind people, so that the sensor captures in 360 degrees. It must not be 360, it's 180, what's in front of him, and it gives you beeping sounds to let you know how close things are. Like throughout the process, he needed a lot of feedback on, is this working, is it not working? He had to trial and test, and at the end, of course you want to get recognized, but by who? Because they're tired of us as the learning guides giving them recognition. They want their friends to see it, they want their family, they want to broadcast that out into the world. So I think we also need to think about too, with this generation, like what is the way that they want to be recognized? A lot of our learners, when we've talked to them about it, they're like, yeah, we would love to use Instagram as our space where we get feedback, where we get to post and we get to, because it's really important for them, not just getting feedback, but from whom do you get feedback, right? And so they want to be in communities of interest, and they divided it too, which I thought was really interesting. They said, I want just the likes, just so I can see how cool I am, but I also then want the actual real feedback from someone who's an expert in the field, or who gets me and who really sees what I'm trying to do and can push me to the next level. And so I think it's so easy to do if you don't try to do it to someone, because they will resist, they will feel bad about themselves. But when you ask, what would be the best checkpoints along the way? What kind of feedback do you want? And what would you like the final output to be? It's not that challenging.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Devin. Thanks, Angela, Carol, Simon, for your time, for sharing your experience. Very much appreciated. And yeah, hopefully we can connect sometimes in the future. Again, thank you very much, James, for moderating this roundtable. And with this, we move to our next group of experts, shifting gears, so to say, and looking at teacher training. As we all know, the world around us is changing at lightning speed, and technology is changing the way we live, learn, work, and communicate. In our first roundtable yesterday, we discussed which skills we need to teach the young generation to prepare them for the world they will be living in 10 or 20 years, when many of today's jobs will be taken over by machines and AI. Today, a practical education must prepare our students for work that does not yet exist, in the future that cannot be clearly defined. Therefore, lifelong learning will be the future of today's students, but it also needs to be the present of their teachers. With the title, Train the Teacher, Building a Culture of Continuous Learning, our last roundtable of this year's Re.school GSA Forum focuses on you, on the teachers. Without you, none of the discussed and needed changes in education will happen. Therefore, it is a great pleasure to welcome our three experts for this panel. Carolina Bergamasco from Cognita Schools. Carolina holds an MA from UCL Institute of Education. She spent several years leading K-12 teams, in addition to work as a head teacher. She's currently involved in the EdTech rollout at Cognita Schools. Welcome, Carolina. Pirjo Suhonen, founder of ALO Finland, which offers massive open online courses, MOOCs on Finnish education. She's a strong believer in lifelong learning and is passionate about creativity, innovation, and global education. Welcome to Finland. And Jon Tait, Deputy CEO and Director of School Improvement at the Areté Learning Trust in North Yorkshire in the UK. Education author for Bloomsbury Education, blogger, and speaker. Welcome, Jon. As in all our roundtables, each panelist will share an opening statement of up to 3 minutes with the initial thoughts, and then we get us started there. So I'm gonna stop sharing and would like to ask to kick us off, Carolina. Welcome from Chile.
Thank you, Sven. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Am I already sharing my screen?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You could put it in presentation mode, and then we take it there.
Okay. So trained teacher, thinking about this, I thought about 5 building blocks as part of a cycle. First of all, relationships, embracing change, collective process, clear needs, and multiple spaces of learning in order to build a culture of continuous learning. Now, what do I mean by this? In terms of relationship, building block at the heart of the process is trust. We also need to support our teachers, and also they need to feel challenged by everything we do. In the second place, multiple spaces of learning through digital platforms, participating in social media. Teachers might be able, to learn and to connect with other professional learning networks. In relation to clear needs, it is extremely important to keep our teachers engaged, empowered. And how do we do this? We do it through feedback. We need to know what their needs are. We need to know where they are. Then, in relation to collective process, the creation of peer groups, professional communities, and being part of a global learning ecosystem. And finally, embracing change. Here, it is extremely important for our teachers to adapt to the new scenarios, to use creativity as another student in the classroom, let us say, and finally, be digitally knowledgeable. That would be my part. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Pirjo, do you want to follow?
Lovely. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just share the screen. I continue. Thank you, Carolina. That was very interesting. So there I am, slideshow, there. Sven already introduced me, so I can skip the first one, but there I am. And I'm gonna talk more about Finnish double flip, which was part of my master's thesis. I did fairly recently about educational technology, but more about the pedagogy side of it. And I just thought that could give a nice example how could learning and teaching look like in schools, not just in Finland, but elsewhere. And this was a lovely feedback from a principal from UK. I didn't even ask for this, and he just gave it to me, so it's special. So he wrote to me that how to utilize the skills, innovation, and abilities of students across the world as digital natives, as well as develop global cross-cultural communication. I mean, how good is that? What else I could ask for? So these kids, they didn't just teach the whole school, the basics of coding, but they were a couple of nearby schools who did bicycle trips for coding lessons. And they became sort of local celebrities. And here they are teaching local entrepreneurs and even the mayor. They are more on the other side, the basics of coding. And apparently mayor wasn't too bad at it either. And then I love technology, but teacher is still the best app out there. Innovation in education is still teaching, and it most likely will be. There is so much stuff you can do with technology, but you need the creative teachers to really make the magic happen. And also, when I was doing my master's thesis, I researched flipped classroom, and they mentioned that teacher's role is crucial when flipping or doing the traditional teaching. Otherwise, if they did not get the students the enough help, the results would be quite the same. And also, learning happens everywhere. This is a maths lesson outside, and it should be, learning should be, or the education should be always holistic, not just about reading, writing, arithmetics. They are and will be important as long as we live in a written and numerical world. But however, there are so many competencies that our kids need also. And to finish it off, since we've had a massive global pandemic, I hope that there's a silver lining, and that tiny virus has already showed us how close and connected we are in a bad way. So hopefully the good thing is that we could come slightly closer and learn from each other a bit more. We have the technology for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pirjo, for these initial words. And finally, Jon, please go ahead. Pirjo, please. Perfect.
Hi there. Thank you, Sven. I'm not going to present. I'm just going to talk through some of my kind of key opening kind of comments about teacher training and about really how I think that it is really so important for us to be at the cutting edge of this in our profession. One thing I want to start with is a statement. How can we be role models to learners if we're not learners ourselves? I think that's really important to demonstrate that we are lifelong learners ourselves as teachers. Just because we are qualified or we got our degree 15, 20 years ago, doesn't mean to say we're any more relevant than we were maybe 20 years ago. So I think it's really important to make sure we're constantly learning, and we're not afraid to talk to our students and our learners about how we're still reading, how we're still learning, how we're still trying and failing and being resilient and being gritty with that, because those are the exact same characteristics that we want to build in our young people. So we need to not shy away from the fact that we are still learning, and to be the excellent teachers that we are and leaders that we are, we need to keep learning. I think that's a really key skill and a message we need to send to our students. Also, I think that we need to make sure that, I always say we've got to have cutting edge professional development. Thinking about cars, we don't pour orange juice in our cars and expect them to run. We pour quality petrol and fuels into our car. Professional development is the same. We need to give our teachers the right fuel, the right mental fuel to be cutting edge teachers. We can't expect our learners to be world-class learners without our teachers being world-class teachers. So it's really important that we get that right, because if we don't get that right, we're not going to get the learning right in the classroom. We need to treat people like professionals. We need to, something that Devin said in the last talk actually, making sure that professional development is done with people and not felt like it's done to you. And actually you're part of that and you have a responsibility for it, because actually, certainly here in the UK, that's part of the teacher standards, to continually update your own professional development, not just wait until somebody says this is happening tonight, but actually going out of your own way. So how can we make sure we do that as leaders and as schools, to actually create a culture of learning within the adults in the building, all of the adults in the building, not just the leaders, not just the teachers, but all of the adults in our building, because ultimately as educators, we're there to improve and develop people, no matter how old they are. And then lastly, kind of this idea of building on the EdTech boom, that actually the learning can be and should be for adults and for teachers anytime, anywhere. So how can we take advantage of the innovations, the different technology, the different opportunities, so that we don't have to wait 3 weeks for a professional learning session in school. If I want to learn about questioning tonight, I can, because I've got the tools to do that, and there shouldn't be any barriers in front of teachers who want to learn. So that's my passion for professional learning in terms of teacher training.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jon. I think we touched upon a lot of interesting points already. MIT professor Peter Senge said, the 21st century teacher has to teach what he doesn't know because change is happening so fast. So what is the knowledge and skills that teachers in the 21st century need to have in this changing environment? And what should they be experts in? Pirjo, you want to kick us off?
Why not? Thank you, Jon. That was very passionate and inspiring. I totally agree with you, just to say that to begin with. And I mean, firstly, of course, they need to be experts in their topic, whatever they teach. In Finnish primary schools, you tend to teach everything. But when you go higher, of course, you need to update your knowledge continuously. So hopefully you have the passion and motivation, what Jon was saying, so that you can give the latest info for your students too. And about the skills, I mean, like I mentioned, that creativity is one of my passion areas. You need it in not just in arts and music, but everything you do in life. And my mission statement for ALO Finland is actually cultivating curiosity, creativity, and future innovators. So if the teachers can have a little bit of that spark of those young kids who are born curious, then we are already on a winning side. So, but Jon was already mentioning it, that you need to create the culture, and also Carolina, that you have to be trusted professional to be able to push yourself and also to allow yourself to make mistakes and not be penalized about it. Only that way you can actually innovate and feel creative, be brave to be a risk taker.
Jon, do you want to add anything? What should be teachers experts in?
Yeah, I agree what Pirjo said there about kind of needing to be an expert in your subject first, and I think that's a given, and we've had that. And interestingly, I think that through my 20 years in teaching, I've seen that we've had to be experts in our subject, and we've had to be experts in classroom craft in terms of engaging students and being able to. You can't just bring an expert in from industry and expect them to be able to teach some of your most difficult students. There is a craft in doing that. However, one thing that I think we have not really touched, and it led me to my frustrations of writing a book about it, that we haven't really understood enough about the science of learning and how human beings or students actually learn and retain information. And only recently, very recently really, we're finding that things like retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, cognitive load, dual coding, all of those things are starting to actually filter down to the mainstream classroom now. But in my experience over the last few years, there hadn't been topics that the everyday classroom teacher knew about, and lots of the research had been written years and years ago. You look at Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, 1885 it was written, yet I'm talking to teachers about it right now and they're going, oh wow, and they're kind of just realizing and learning that actually, what you teach, 90% of what you teach students will be forgotten within the first 2 weeks. And teachers are like, wow, really? Yeah. And this has been around for like 120 years, and people are like it's blowing my mind. So we really need to get better at understanding what should be our core business, how students retain information, how they process information, when, from a cognitive load point of view, when it's too much, all those types of things that I don't think we've done anywhere near enough of. And so I wrote a book because I was so frustrated. Well, first of all, I thought that I'd been a fraud and that everyone else knew it apart from me. So I was kind of like going into conversations saying, oh, do you know about this as well? And they were saying, no, I didn't know it either. And I thought, oh, okay, it's not just me. So I wrote this book out of frustration that the research is out there, but my teachers that taught me didn't use that. I would have liked to have used those techniques when I first started teaching. And the teachers that teach my own kids, I think, need to know it as well. So it was out of that frustration that I feel we all need to get better at that, because there are some key fundamental areas that as teachers we really should know about. And unfortunately, it's certainly not mainstream enough that I think it's embedded in our practice yet. We're getting there, but slowly.
Before people asking, what's the name of the book, the title?
Teaching Rebooted. So it really talks about the mistakes that we've made, the kind of teacher 1.0, what we've already done, it goes through all of those areas that I talked about, breaks down some research, and then says, here are 4 ideas for every bit of research that we can put into our practice. So it's hopefully a really simple, succinct guide, so you don't have to troll through all the research. I've done that for you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Following up a little bit on your idea of what's the core business of teachers, Carolina, what's the role of teachers in the 21st century?
Well, I think that teachers should be definitely change drivers, and on the other hand, life learning facilitators. You know, there's this model of education, the traditional model of, you know, teaching-led classrooms. I think that has to change, and no matter the effort, sometimes it's really hard. We need our teachers to bring joy into the learning, to empower our students, to make the classroom a safe place where students can be willing to take risks, to help them create leadership, to invite them to express their voice in the classroom. Why not in the whole teaching and learning process? In a way, it's being, you know, leading this co-constructive process of learning together, making connections, thinking about different ways through creativity, curiosity, soft skills, on how to get students hooked all the time, because it's impossible, you know, to have a successful lesson if your students are not engaged. And if you are talking 100% of the time or most of the time, and they are just there sitting and listening, and we know, as Jon said, you know, there's a wide range of supporting new tools in terms of digital technology. However, we still have teachers, you know, using technology with the teacher-led model. So we need to change that. And that's why I think it's super important for teachers to become change drivers and lifelong learning facilitators.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Jon, at Areté Learning Trust, what are you doing as an organization to help your teachers create an environment of lifelong learning?
One thing we're just about to launch actually this coming academic year, which for us starts in September, is we're creating a digital platform, like a website, but it's going to be mobile first. So we're going to really try and launch it as an app, where we're going to be able to, a bit like a social timeline, have all of our, because we have 3 schools in our trust across kind of North Yorkshire, have all of our subject teachers from different subjects in groups, so they can share, they can talk about ideas, and they can actually you know, share great practice and do that kind of peer-to-peer learning. But also we can then drop in reading articles we've seen, blogs, videos, books, and we can make learning feel more social, because it's interesting that not many people would want to email the whole staff what they've done in a lesson and how good it's been, but they might put it on that social platform and put a picture on, as you would do with Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So making learning more social and making it feel more, because then people can like it. And again, you wouldn't reply to somebody and just say with a thumbs up, but liking an article or liking something that someone's put on demonstrates. I think we're trying to use the culture that's there, that we know as adults we are familiar with in terms of our own learning. Things like, you know, I know if I don't know how to do something, what do? I probably Google it or go to YouTube and watch a walkthrough on it. So how can we then transfer the same ideas into our professional learning, so that our adults and our teachers can learn in that kind of social way, again, when they want to, you know, on their phone, from their pocket, or when they're sat on the toilet or lying in bed. It doesn't matter. What matters is they have chosen when to learn. We haven't forced it upon them at a certain time. They have decided that they have got some headspace, sitting in the garden, sitting in bed, wherever it is, doesn't matter. The conditions are right for them to learn, so we need to make sure that happens. So trying to make it as social and as accessible as possible, and really getting that buy-in so that people almost don't see like they're learning, which I suppose is a trick that we use, or not a trick, but a method we use with students as well, don't we, to, you know, to engage them in their learning as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. So in a way, really again, to co-create, right, amongst the colleagues, just sharing what works for me, and then maybe somebody else can build upon that. Carolina, in a previous Re.school event, I had the pleasure to discuss with Cognita's group well-being director. So I got the impression that teacher well-being is at the heart of your organization. Can you share some of the strategies you use to make sure teachers have the needed skills to teach efficiently in the 21st century?
Well, indeed, Sven. Actually, Cognita, as you know, is a worldwide organization with nearly 90 schools around the world. And well-being is at the heart of it, you know, and we have a global director. And since well-being is so important, and this is something that we already discussed way before the pandemic, but now is you know, critical. The idea is that we involve the whole community by supporting teachers and staff with their well-being in order to support our students. Because we all know that in the end, teachers are the stars. Teachers are the ones who need to be, you know, better prepared to be better teachers. And the social emotional aspect is extremely important to have a healthy and safe environment for our students because they are in our care. Now, obviously, in order to achieve this, we have personalized talks. We have school-to-school projects. We have a platform where all of our teachers and supporting staff can be able to connect with each other. Lots of professional learning communities, teams, where they exchange best practice. And we have a systematic, you know, way of embedding and fostering this culture of well-being, because in the end, you care for me and I care for you. And in order to do that, there's, you know, we take into account specific topics or contributors, which we share with the community, and through the different initiatives teachers carry out with the students, with parents, etc. Now, it's very important to take into account also that in sharing well-being, we also have a worldwide event. Once a year, the entire Cognita global community collapses by the end of September to celebrate well-being, apart from all these initiatives.
Are you also using your platform where you share experiences amongst teachers for joint learning experiences?
Yes, indeed. So the nice thing about the platform is that you can join any community you will feel like, you know. So there's like digital learning communities, well-being communities, math teachers communities, primary, early years, etc. And there's also self-paced learning modules you can take freely. So it is more or less what Jon was mentioning, you know, like learning whenever I want, whenever I can. That's sure. You know, in the end, what really helps nowadays.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carolina. Pirjo, ALO Finland is offering, according to your website, digital teacher training on Finnish education 2.0. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, just to add to Carolina's comment, I like to say that happy teacher is a good teacher, and if you can build that social emotional connection to kids, it's so much easier to teach if they like you, and the opposite if they don't. And but yeah, about ALO Finland, it's I like to think that it's well, let me start where it started, because I used to teach in Brussels in the European school, and I was the only Finnish teacher there. So of course, everyone came to ask me that, what is the secret? And I was just like, well, I don't know. I'm kind of born with it. I can't put my finger on it. So,
I was asking you what's the secret.
So anyway, I started to dig in deeper, and I couple of the teachers came to visit the schools with me, and it was a good eye-opener for me also, because they saw it from an outsider point of view. And it was one of them, who is now a principal back in Ireland, who said that why there isn't an online opportunity for this, because it's expensive to fly to Finland, stay in hotels, eat out, and it's quite difficult to find the schools also, because since the first PISA we've had thousands, and some of the schools in Helsinki, thousands of visitors, they closed their doors, not because they don't want to meet all the educators, but they wouldn't be teaching anymore if they took them all in. So fair enough for them. So of course, my response was like, yeah, right, I'm going to build it. And then I thought about it more, and I was like, that's actually a great idea. Of course, it's not quite the same when you walk in there and you really feel and sense the atmosphere, etc. But with plenty of photos, videos, little bit of explaining what our curriculum is, but more to show how it happens in our schools and classrooms. Because whatever curriculum you have, it's the upper level planning, isn't it? But how you implement it is the crucial part. That's where it either fails or succeeds. So, and teachers are the ones who really make that magic happen in classrooms. So, so I wanted to do that, and so far so good. I got lovely courses on that flipped classroom, coding and competencies, and we did policy. And if you know about flipped classroom, we flip it twice in Finland. And then we have gamified mathematics and 21st century competencies. Every single country are talking about them. They don't vary too much. They might name them differently, but when you compare to elsewhere, they are about the same: creativity, critical thinking, etc. So there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So it's a window to the world, from Finland to the world, to share some of the secrets why Finnish schools tend to have good outcome in standardized tests.
Indeed. And actually, can I just quickly add
Sure.
that it's all of those examples, they don't work just in Finland. I like to think that whatever you do locally can quite easily be implemented globally, meaning elsewhere. And I've had quite many teachers in India actually who have taken the courses, and I love it when they come back to me. I don't want to give them teacher manual, follow step 1, step 2, step 3. That is just dead boring. But just to give them idea that you could do this, like in Finland, we had a climate change project, and the kids built a snowman next to a road to protest that if we don't look after the climate, we won't have snow soon. Obviously, you can't really do that in India, can you? But you can do something else. And there's been many times when I haven't even thought about it, that, yeah, you can use the same methods here or there and everywhere. And this is what learning should be, and creative, not just creative learning, but creative teaching.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the pandemic has shown us that many of today's kids are much more tech savvy than we as adults, right? And many pupils probably have skills teachers might be able to learn from. So wouldn't it be great if schools were not only a place where teachers teach kids, but also kids would teach their teachers? How could we use children's curiosity and interest to impulse teacher learning? Carolina, any thoughts?
Interesting. I think here we have, as teachers, we have a huge challenge, and I would say let go of control. And because we as teachers are kind of control freaks, you know, so letting go of control is something that would give children space, you know, space to participate, to say things, and on the other hand, it's important for us as teachers to know our students, because we have a classroom of, well, 30 something here in Chile, but it's important to know each one of our students, their interests. For example, at the beginning of the year, through a survey, asking parents, and then sort of having a specific space in the schedule so they can share that, because that makes them feel, you know, interested, curious to know more about my classmate and even my teacher, and be active participants in the lesson and willing to share ideas, take risks, and many other things which we now need. You know, not just the teacher talking.
Pirjo, you want to add anything to that? How we can use children's creativity to trigger teachers' learning?
Well, sometimes I feel like I would be a millionaire if I could take at least a little bit of their creativity and energy levels too. I mean, coding lesson was a good example. I mean, of course, I was the one who taught them the basics, but they were actually teaching all of the teachers also the basics of coding. This idea came when the latest curriculum, it introduced coding, and most of the teachers were panicking that how on earth I'm going to teach that? I have no idea about it. So and in primary and secondary level, it's fairly simple. So I just wanted to give them a door opener. So that was good, and kids loved it. And quite often in Finland, we have this thing called phenomenal learning, which is quite often misunderstood, that Finland is definitely not getting rid of subjects, even if it's quite often written elsewhere, it's not true. So, but phenomenal learning means that you ask the kids, or you just kind of find out what their interests are and what their passions are. Like this year, I've been teaching preschoolers, and they're really sporty, and I mean super energetic. I'm knackered after every day, but they chose the theme of Olympics, and they organized Olympics for the rest of the school. And today we visited the Olympic Stadium. I mean, I didn't just learn for them, but I learned with them by visiting places, and they asked me questions, and why are they 5 different colors, and why is it on a white background? So then we just studied together.
Jon, anything else?
Yeah, one of the best examples that I can refer to here in the UK are lots of schools have now digital leaders who are kind of student leaders. You know, so teams of students in school who are trained as digital leaders, and they are selected based on their interest in kind of maybe, you know, we've been talking about digital technology, haven't we? So maybe they are experts in Google Docs, in slides, in Excel, in whatever it may be, video editing. And actually the best examples I've seen are where they have schools almost have a directory of what their expertise is, their students, and teachers can book a session with one of the students. You know, I want to do some project-based learning and we're going to do some video editing, but I don't know where to start. Right, I'm booking an hour with this student who's going to show me and tell me and give me a 60-minute tutorial on how I can use my iPad to do the recording, the editing, the making it into something really, really nice. So that's been where I found it the kind of best examples. And then those students are also used to teach younger students, maybe not in replace of the classroom teacher, but doing assemblies about e-safety and going into primary schools, you know, to talk about that. And I think what it does, it not only helps the teachers because it upskills the teachers, but it's amazing for those students to be, you know, puffing their chest out and I'm a digital leader and I've been teaching this. We're creating tomorrow's leaders, tomorrow's teachers. You know, we're giving them the expertise, the confidence, and isn't that amazing that we can identify skills in young people that we need ourselves and we can call on them. And I've seen that used. Also, I've also seen it used where they've been used when a computer has not working, and they can, a digital leader comes along and just goes, tick, 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 you haven't done this, and it works again. And we go, oh, brilliant. And the digital leader goes, there you go, miss, there you go, sir. And, there's lots of ways that we can use those teams. And I think it's great skills for them as well. So, yeah, I mean, and that's happening quite a lot, certainly in the UK. I suspect globally as well, in terms of digital leaders. And there's quite a few, if people are watching and thinking, I'd like to get involved in that, there are quite a few actually accredited kind of schemes and platforms, I think, where they can get digital badges and they can kind of work towards certain standards as well. So if you are interested in that, certainly look that up and look about how your school can get involved with some digital leaders, and you can train up some of your students, because we all know every school will have a group of kids who would be amazing immediately at some of those things. So yeah, definitely have a look at that.
That's a wonderful idea. We talked a little bit about peer learning, right? Then learning amongst teachers. Maybe Carolina, you can share a little bit more of the things you are doing at Cognita, how to foster organizational learning between your teachers, because you have the wonderful opportunity to do that even globally, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, as I was mentioning before, Sven, for us, it's being even before the pandemic and this whole, teams creation and platform, we were always thinking about how to make the most of being a global organization, because we not only think about being 100 teachers, but thousands of teachers, and there is so much wealth, so much knowledge that can be shared. So in doing so, we are constantly driving initiatives across the world through these teams and professional learning networks, and all teachers can be involved. Now, at a local level, for example, we have teachers from different, perhaps, sections of the schools and different schools. Remember, there are 14 schools here in Chile. Being part of a network and uploading initiatives, videos of lessons to help each other. And now we also thought about, since digital learning is so important and critical, we are launching our first global EdTech conference called the School of the Future in September for Cognita students and teachers. 3 days, the whole Cognita community. You can obviously join us as an audience as well, by showing and exchanging students' projects, teacher projects, and different talks, roundtables, and plenaries, because this is something that involves the entire community. So we're going to be obviously working around 6 topics: gamification, robotics, artificial intelligence, extended reality, and digital learning, digital culture. But it's a way to have everybody being connected, but at the same time learning and growing together. That is something we are very excited about. And as I said before, we have thousands of teachers, so it's really a great idea to work all together and to try to learn and face the challenges this post-pandemic world has put on the table.
Isn't it wonderful, the opportunities that technology is giving us to drive that global learning? Jon, your thoughts on peer-to-peer learning? You mentioned already the platform you're building. How many schools are you at your trust?
Just 3 at the moment. But what Carolina, where we want to get to, that's I suppose the vision, and she's articulated that beautifully in terms of how staff can come together, share projects, learn from each other, and that's ultimately what my vision is to get to. And I think that rather than sharing any more ideas, because I think that Carolina's got some great ideas that everyone can take away there, what I want to unpick a little bit and just kind of talk a little bit about is that authenticity that brings. The fact that another teacher who teaches some of the students you teach, or teaches in your schools or your area, is doing something, and it's not coming from a hierarchy of somebody saying above saying you must do this. There's a real authenticity of it being shared on the ground, peer to peer, and I think that's where it becomes really, really powerful, because there is, nobody's selling anything for any other reason than actually, listen, this just works in my classroom, like, give it a go. And I think there's a real kind of authenticity and power about that. And that's why, when we don't just take a salesperson's word for it, we want to find out what someone else who's already bought that product thinks about it. That's why reviews are so important. So that this authenticity works, isn't it, because of that. And I think also there's something called, which if people are listening, they don't know, to search up, called the curse of knowledge. So the more you know about something, the harder it is to teach it to a novice, because it feels so easy to you because you've been doing it for ages, you're an expert, and it's very difficult to teach someone else something. But if you're also a novice and you're also learning it at the same time, that person generally can probably explain it better than an expert, because they are going through the same thought processes, the same barriers, they're hitting the same roadblocks. So they can actually say, I know what you're probably feeling right now, or I did that as well. Whereas when you become an expert, you sometimes get a little bit too distant from that. And I think that having people who are learning it and trying new techniques in the classroom, helping other people who are doing the same at the same time, I think is really, really important, because it then creates that real quality learning of people at the same kind of stages. And I think sometimes that authenticity really shines through. So the things that Carolina has described there are brilliant. And I feel that's exactly where we want to be. And certainly that's exactly where we're heading. And I would say that would be kind of fantastic practice for anybody watching or listening to think, how can we do that irrespective of how big or how small our organization is? It doesn't matter whether you're one school, whether you're 50 schools, the scale is just bigger, but the operation and the thinking behind sharing and peer-to-peer learning is exactly the same. So I would urge anybody to look at that and try and replicate that in some way, shape or form in your organization.
Thank you very much, Pirjo. You want to add anything to peer-to-peer learning? I mean, your platform is a peer-to-peer learning at the end of the day, right?
Indeed, it is. And like I mentioned earlier, that I don't want it to be just local, but I'd love to make it global. And I already have educators. I mean, I find it inspiring and fascinating how similar we are in the ways we think and learn and teach wherever you go, and the educators you talk with. And like I mentioned already earlier about the 21st century competencies, which most of the countries are talking about, that they also very similar. So there is already global education out there, but it could be even more so, and to the grassroots level too. And authenticity is definitely a beautiful thing. It's real, and I think it works whatever you do, whether you're teaching or else. And also Jon was mentioning that, I mean, coding lessons was all about peer-to-peer learning, and the kids also use the same language, so it's a bit more simplified than what adults would use, so it makes it easier. And when you do peer-to-peer learning, they also deepen their own knowledge, like these little coding ambassadors. They did it for 3 years until they went to secondary. Hopefully they continue there. And because they got so into it themselves, they carried on to robotics, and they took part in robotic competitions, and they came 2nd and 3rd in the national ones in the following years. So there's plenty of evidence to show that it works. It works both ways, I mean.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Before we come to some questions from our audience, I would like to ask each of you for one idea, one practical advice. What could each of us do tomorrow morning at our school to surprise our pupils and increase their learning motivation? Switching a little bit from learning of teachers to learning to our students. Pirjo, do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, why not? Well, I already said that be a risk taker and fail, learn and fail again. And ask the kids sometimes that what is it that you want to learn more, or is there a topic that you would love to learn that we haven't really touched yet? Or are they really good at something that they could teach to others? This way you can also build that beautiful learning community, not just in your classroom, but in the whole school. So maybe that.
Thank you very much, Jon.
One thing I would say is one of my bugbears when I kind of watch teachers is improving our questioning, because I think far too many teachers use default questioning techniques with students with hands up. So actually lots of kids can then just check out of the lesson and what I would call mentally truant, because they know that you're only going to ask students with their hands up. So going to your question about how we would surprise them, well, actually, having a hands down approach of, I'm going to ask a question, I'm going to actually pick who answers this question, and really being really more effective. And Doug Lemov calls this kind of cold calling, so that every single person has to be thinking in your classroom because they don't know who you're going to pick to answer that question. And suddenly the amount of deep thinking, the quality of thought, the challenge, the rigor in the classroom, and the quality of your questioning hugely improves, because actually the students don't know who it's going to be. They can't just put their hands in their pockets and think, if I keep my hands down, I won't need to think this lesson. So really challenging the students that they have to be thinking at all points. And then if we add things to that, and when we can do this a little bit better when we're out of COVID, but walking around the classroom and using your presence. And as you walk around and ask a question and stand behind a student, that student is then thinking, oh, it could be me, it could be me, it could be me. And they're starting to think and using all of those skills in your armory to get all students to be thinking, because they don't know who's going to be asked. And it's not about them deciding whether or not to think. They have to, because you're in charge and you're going to actually work out, and ask who's going to answer that question. So definitely brushing up on our questioning. And for me, that's one of the biggest things in our armory as teachers.
Yeah, hopefully all students around the world will be back to school very, very soon. Carolina, do you close the round?
Well, I find super interesting what Pirjo and Jon have just said. I think I would definitely do something in order to provoke my students' curiosity. Now, this is not easy. However, if you think about doing something at the beginning of the lesson, perhaps sharing like a glimpse of what is going to come, asking the 5 whys questions, for example, which will keep them hooked. I think I would definitely go for that, provoking curiosity in order to have them hooked and with me all the time.
Perfect. Thank you very much. With this, I would pass on the word to Christina with some questions from the audience.
Good afternoon. So questions. The one, I think that this goes for Carolina. Letting go of control is something this teacher, whose name is Alison, thinks about often. Does education maintain status quo in attracting people with certain personality types? How do we shift that, particularly in urban areas, serving the most needy kids?
Wow, that is a big question.
It is.
Yeah, especially considering, the context you're mentioning. I would say that this is something, obviously, letting go of control is not something you as a teacher can do from one day to the next. It is a whole process in which you have to sort of learn together with your students by giving them space and gaining their trust, and you at a certain point being a bit humble, humble because you don't have all the answers. You cannot manage all the situations, all the factors, all the elements that take place in a classroom. So no matter what the context, I would say is thinking about children, thinking about students, and the importance of their voice. When you are willing to hear students' voice, you're letting go of control at some point. I hope I could answer at some point my colleague's question.
Yeah, well, this was the learn to listen that Carol Allen on the other roundtable said, so great. And okay, this links to another question. How can we give a space to students with the tight schedules they have to meet the curriculum? How much time would you recommend to get this off control, or would this something be, you know, within the way you teach?
Well, in the case, for example, in the case of our country, we all know that there's countries where, you know, the curriculum might be super flexible, whereas other countries, and that's the case in Chile, we have a rigid structure curriculum with, you know, subjects with a certain number of hours, and we don't have much space to move. However, what you can do is not, I mean, giving that space within your own classroom, you know, and this might be, I don't know, perhaps just by shooting something at the beginning of the lesson, you know, like checking prior knowledge, instead of, okay, today we are going to learn so-and-so, and it will just take you a couple of minutes, but you will realize about how much you can gain as a community in the classroom by giving the students the chance.
Wow, very interesting. Pirjo, this one goes for you. The curriculum implementation is a matter of teachers, you said, but do the government policies help? I guess that this person says that, I guess that in Finland, this might be different, right? I mean, not all the countries have their governments or, you know, that align to them, no, in terms of education.
Sorry, did I understand the question that is the curriculum flexible enough so that you can do?
Well, yeah, because in some countries, I guess that this was the question, the curriculum is very tight and
Yeah.
you know, very strict, and they can, and it's not that flexibility possible. This flexibility is not that possible, no? And you say the way the way the curriculum is implemented is something that has to be with the teachers, right? But I don't think that this is that easy in certain countries. How can we do it if the curriculum is tight and you have to meet it, and, you know, and you don't have enough hours? Because
Yeah.
Finland is like a, you know, an isolated world, and then becomes the other part of the world, right?
Yeah, it is true, and that is a great point. However, it is more, Finnish teachers are given more autonomy because they are considered as trusted professionals. However, you still need to do the certain amount of subjects, but younger you are, more flexibility you have. That, for instance, today, if I can see that the kids are learning mathematics and they're really willing to learn, a teacher can decide that, okay, let's do this, and then tomorrow we dig into whatever else is there. It is true that it's a lot wider. Our national curriculum is like a broad framework. Within the lines, teachers have a lot of freedom to choose the methods and variety of methods and tools, how they teach the kids in their schools and classrooms, because of course it varies every single year. So it's not so, we don't follow so tight.
Then this
like
is the
you
difference.
even call a teacher manual. But however,
so now we know the secret.
Yeah. So what Carolina was also saying, that it doesn't have to be a massive change. I don't think anyone is asking to flip into being a Finnish teacher or innovator in one, baby steps, and see the change, how it might spark the curiosity and also creativity, both in you and the learners too. And you might find out that those kids, they actually suck in the information a lot faster and more effectively just by doing those little tweaks in your teaching and learning. Because I don't think anywhere, and like I mentioned earlier, everywhere they are talking about 21st century competencies. So if you can prove them wrong, that this curriculum, if I follow it step by step, you might lack in elsewhere.
Mm. And the last question goes for Jon. Wouldn't it be good to have a teacher training session on how they learn? I mean, you talked about this, and any recommendation of an online course or a book or anything, please?
Yeah, well, and I think that certainly, I don't want to bash teacher training here, but I think that teacher training should include a lot more of this, because I think it's at the core fundamentals of who we are as educators. We need to understand how human beings, children, et cetera, learn information, process information, how we can use the desirable difficulties to make things just hard enough, you know, the kind of Goldilocks approach of just at the right level to make sure it's hard enough for them to be able to, you know, to make the biggest differences. The conditions in which we learn. There's so many things around what I call the science of learning, I think is really important. So there are lots of different kind of courses out there that I think people are, and lots of different books there. Like I say, I wrote my own book on that out of my own frustration, that I felt that, like I said at the start, that I felt like I was a fraud because I thought I was the only person that didn't know this. And actually it turns out that not many people knew it. So I kind of wrote that. So if people want to look for my book, it's Teaching Rebooted. But equally, you look at, just search for the science of learning, look for, you know, metacognition or dual coding, spacing, retrieval. There are so many books out there. And what's lovely about the explosion of really digital technology, I suppose, has helped this, is that when I then started blogging and tweeting about things, and I had a platform to do that, and I had a platform to share it with educators around the world. And I think because of that, there are so many now authentic teachers who are still teaching, writing books for fellow teachers. And gone are the days now where it has to just be people from, you know, kind of university or researchers writing those things. People are writing them now at the chalk face, and I think that's really, really important. And I think that creates that authenticity again. So, you know, if you are wanting to do some of that reading, you know, there's some amazing books out there. Have a look at what's out there, because there's some really cutting edge texts now that are out there from, you know, from current practitioners that cite a lot of the research that's been written in the past, but with maybe more of a practical or an up-to-date spin on it.
Thank you. In fact, your book was recommended in the chat. So that's all for tonight. Thank you, Sven.
Perfect.
I hand over it to you.
Carolina, Pirjo, Jon, thank you so much. It has been a true pleasure guiding together Finland, the UK, and Chile to co-create and to share your experience and your vision. Thank you so much for your time. And if you want, please enjoy the rest of the evening. We have one more session, which is our closing keynote, and it's a true pleasure as well to welcome Stephen Happel. Stephen is the Felipe Segovia Chair of Learning Innovation at the Universidad Camilo José Cela in Madrid. Stephen is a global leader in the fields of education technology and physical learning space design. Founder of Happel.net, a learning policy and project consultancy. As you know, Stephen is a frequent speaker at education conferences and events like the BET Show. Stephen, it's a true pleasure having you with us for the closing keynote today. The floor is yours for the next 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for still being here, and hello to people that are watching this on a catch-up video, because I guess people will be seduced off by the football as well at some point in all this. So look, we got half an hour, and my, what a decade it is ahead of us. I mean, I've been teaching a long time. These are genuine wrinkles here, but there's nothing in my career comparing to the 10 years ahead of us. So let's get started and let's think about it. I mean, let's talk about technology for a moment. And I'm surrounded by it here. You know, I'm still a professor. There's a lot of geeky stuff lying around here. What have we got? There, a Google Glass. I can stream live video to you. I've got a headset here. Lets me control my computer with my mind waves, which is you know, interesting. I've got some little tiny robots left from the sort of history of all this, and yet technology hasn't quite made the impact it should have made. I chaired the Education Technology Action Group for the UK government. Michael Gove, David Willett set it up, asked me to look at it, had a team of people for a year. And probably our biggest conclusion was that something's got to move out of the way if we're going to do all the things we hope to do with technology. Well, something has moved. And dear old COVID is the thing that's moved it. I mean, just a catastrophe in terms of the deaths, in terms of the impact on the economy. But in terms of a change in the world, it's a really, really interesting time. I've talked to, I think, 103 ministers of education in the last 14 months, which is a lot, you know. I don't have a collective noun for them all, but none of them are malicious, but they sure as heck are confused. But what's happened to the huge number of children, 1.5 billion children locked out of their schools by COVID, 1.5 billion children. What's happened to them has been really, really interesting. Firstly, well, let me take you back a little bit to the very early days of all this. And some of you are old enough to remember the very, very early days when we were building computers from wood and making up printed circuit boards and goodness knows what else. We just about got the things working, and we said to ourselves, I wonder if there's anything we're doing that technology could do a little better. Yeah, I wonder if technology could help with teaching the time, or maybe some of those very early spreadsheets might give us an insight into the difference between geometric and arithmetic progression or whatever, you know. And we kind of harnessed technology to the things that we were already doing. And I was part of teams doing things like this, making, I've been getting some of this stuff out for you, tools for multimedia, you know. Teachers were going to have multimedia in the classroom. They'd better have the tools to be able to build it, because nobody else was building it for them, you know. And it took a long time to get things working. But what we saw starkly from day one was that when you put technology into learning, children took risks with their learning they hadn't previously been able to take. I mean, even at the level of writing, you know, if you're having to longhand everything on a book with a pen and you want to go back and change the order of your paragraphs or insert a few, you know, fronted adverbials or whatever, you want to change your writing, that's hard work in pen world, but it's really easy work in computer world, because you can cut and paste and delete and save and do all those other things. So kids had a go at things thinking, well, I don't know if it's going to work, but I'll give it a try. Education didn't do that. I don't think we were brave enough, certainly schools weren't brave enough in saying, let's take a risk here, let's really go for it. And yet, if I look back on the projects that I've been involved in my lifetime, and you know, Tesco's SchoolNet was the biggest internet learning project in the world in the Guinness Book of Records. When we launched Talking Heads, that online community of head teachers, 23,000 head teachers all online. This is way before Facebook or social media. Those projects, I used to go home at night, still living in the same place. I used to go home and think, oh my Lord, Stephen, what have you done? You know, what have you done? And I'd wake up in the night in a cold sweat, you know. It was only the things that terrified me that were brave enough to show us how good technology might be in terms of our learning. There's a reason for that. Computers are really good at some things. People are really good at other things. What are computers good at? Well, they're very good at rule-based systems. You know, writing a program is a rule-based system. They're very good at remembering things. You know, I've got hard disks all over the place here, in the USB drives. Computers are fab at remembering things. They're good at matching things. Here's a face, here's another one like it. They're good at batch processing. Do that, okay, now do it again. They're good at doing what they're told, you know, turn them on, turn them off. They don't say, hang on a minute, chief, you know, they just go off. And they're very good at being consistent and at repetition. Unfortunately, a lot of what we've been doing in education over the years, and I'll come back to the time of that, has been looking at repetition and consistency, rule-based systems and remembering and matching things and batch processing. We were doing with the kids the things that computers were going to be really good at. So what are people good at? And where does that fit in the education system? People are really good at ingenuity, solving complex problems together. They're pretty good at creativity. They're very good at deep understanding. At this point, it's quite hard to build a computer that does deep understanding, although, to be fair, at this point, I'm probably reading more quantum computing papers than anything. And I think computers might be pretty good at that soon as well. People are really good at collaborating, working together. They're good at curiosity, thinking, I wonder. And they're very good at they rather enjoy fresh challenges. So here we are, we're in a world where people are good at ingenuity and curiosity. Computers are good at doing what they're told and repetition. It makes sense to put those two together. And what happened with COVID was really interesting, because I was kind of upset by all the stuff that was appearing in the newspapers about the catch-up generation and children had been out of school for a year or whatever, and the BBC here, the fools, talked about a lost generation, you know, the lost generation of children. You know, I mean, we know that when Christchurch had that fearful earthquake some years back, I had a research lab in Christchurch. We know that after the kids were excluded from school by the earthquake, their results went up, you know. So there isn't a lot of evidence to suggest that kids chucked out of school are going to go backwards. So I instigated a little thing that some of you might have been to, because tens of thousands have. This little certificate here, which is, you can find it if you go to heppel.net/golden, heppel.net/golden. It simply says to children, well, you've been out of school for a while. What have you done? What have you done? And the kids type in what they've done, and it generates this lovely certificate that says some very flattering things about them. But I get the data set of all the things the kids have done. And I'll tell you what, when it comes to understanding the impact of technology on learning, data is everything. Some of you might be watching the football later tonight. The head of data in Liverpool Football Club has 11 full-time data analysts working with him, and he has a PhD in theoretical physics. They know so much more than we do about the data of their profession. I'll come back to that in a moment. What we saw from the data, many of you will have seen anecdotally from your own lives. Kids went for depth, not breadth. Schools had said, okay, let's kind of do all this, and next year, on we go, we'll do this, and then on we go. Kids didn't do that. Kids said, you know what, I'm fascinated by space, or I'm fascinated by sailing, or look, here's my granddaughter, Josephine, or there's a better picture of her. Here's Josephine sailing a little boat. She's only 6 then, I think, during lockdown. She's passed all her qualifications up to being a sort of mid-aged teenager, because she just sailed her socks off, you know. And in fact, she did so well that the national authority bought her a boat. The National Olympic Authority said, blimey, you're doing well, we'll buy you a championship-ready boat, you know. Other kids pursued. I was talking to a parent a little while back, and she said, my son's done nothing that he was asked to do by his school at all, nothing. On the other hand, he's just replumbed our entire house, and he's working on the neighbour's bathroom. He's 13. You know, so kids went for things in real depth. You can just about behind me see there on top of the pinball machine, you can see a rocket. Where is it? A rocket there. My other granddaughter, they're 5 and they're 7 now. became obsessed by space, you know, and we were doing a lot of interesting things in space, including, by the way, mixing our own gunpowder to propel the rockets into space. Not sure I should be telling you this, but it did not go off with a whoosh. Learning escaped during COVID. Learning escaped from the structures and strictures we built around it, from the fact that you had to pursue a broad curriculum, and kids didn't want to do it. They went for depth. And not all of it was pleasant. I mean, some of those kids became carers. They were looking after mothers. They were looking after the family, feeding and washing for their siblings. You know, they took on those deep responsibilities and pursued them. Now, this is really interesting, because 75 years before COVID, exactly, we had the end of World War II. And the end of World War II, children had the most torrid time. You know, they'd been evacuated, you know, from their homes. They went into school for a week, carrying their little satchels, thinking, I wonder if today's the day I'm going to be evacuated to Wales. And then, you know, Thursday, the bus turned up, they got on the bus, went to Wales, didn't see their parents for a year and a half, you know. Or they went down the underground to shelter from the bombers. Excuse me, let's have a quick swiggle. It's water, it's not rum. They had the most torrid time. And when they emerged, they had resilience, they had the ability to cope with the unexpected, and they had the certainty that they didn't need to do it the old way. And that generation, of course, was, well, you'd know them as the Beatles, as Vivienne Westwood, as Clive Sinclair, Colin Chapman, you know, a generation of people who were children during the war, and for whom that extraordinary experience transformed them into a golden generation who saved post-war Europe. This generation are the golden generation, the COVID generation. Remember, twice as many people have died in England from COVID as died during the Blitz. So this is a far worse thing than the war was for them. This generation are going to be intolerant of being put back in their boxes. You watch. Now, that's very interesting, because suddenly we've got the most extraordinary technologies coming along, and they allow us to do learning better. Let's have a look at a couple of examples you can go off and do tomorrow in your classroom of how that might be. First of all, let's go back to that data thing, the huge amounts of data that football players, elite sports stars have. I'm lucky enough to do learning with some of the elite sports. Here's the British Olympic hockey team. You can see they work today in something that looks a lot like one of our modern primary classrooms. We're teaching, we've got material on the floor, on the desks, all the walls are writable. You know, you can they're sitting on tiered seating, facing the problem, and the teacher, who you can just about see over here, the teacher has stood back to introduce the problem. Sorry, I got out to like bit of rubbish in front of the camera. There you can't see. You can see what's going on there. So what we learned from them was that aggregation of marginal gains, that everything mattered. And what we got from technology was the ability to look at the details in our classroom. Let's look at a couple. So here's noise. Here's noise in the classroom, and things falling in front of the camera here. This is the yellow line is one of those huge classrooms with lots and lots of kids in, 90s plus 97 kids, I think. They come in the morning, they talk loudly, they get on with the vertical axis is decibels. This is the school day from here to here. And you can see that they get into a model of mutuality and self-help very quickly. And then there's a little plenary before lunch, they go to lunch. They come back, more noise as they chat about their lunch, and then they're quiet and they go home. The other class, which is a traditional classroom, well, we see this every single time. They come in, they don't say much because they've got a seating plan. They don't even bother to turn to the person next door. Hello, James, how are you? You know, they've done all that 2 terms ago. And then they start getting disengaged as they get towards lunch. Noise, be quiet, quite a lot of noise. They have to go to lunch. And the school said they have to go to lunch early because teenagers can't concentrate for a long morning. Well, they clearly can because the other lot are. And then after lunch, they come back and it's noisy, shut up, noisy, shut up, noisy, shut up, noisy, shut up, noisy, sod off, go home, you know. So there's not a lot of learning going on there, and we can see that. You just rig your phone as a decibel meter, but of course, we can give that data to the kids and say to the kids, hey, guys, you know, you're in charge, you sort this out. If the classroom's getting noisy, I'm looking for you to help, because I'm going to nominate a couple of you as, look, here's a couple in Islington. I'm going to nominate you as noise monitors. There's a decibel meter running on an old tablet. If it stays below the orange all morning, we'll go to lunch 5 minutes early. If it gets up too near the orange, these two, the day's noise monitors, will come and shush everybody down and quieten them down. Or here's, let's have a look at CO2, which is pretty hideous in the classroom. So here's CO2. This is a typical classroom with the door shut. Technology gives us the ability to measure the CO2 and look at it. They come in the morning, they breathe, the CO2 goes up, they go out for break. Not much CO2 goes out, heavy gas, keeps on building up to lunchtime. Lunchtime, they go out for lunch. The afternoon, even with the windows open, CO2 stays high. At the end of the day, it finally drops. The yellow line on this graph is the point below which your brain is working optimally. Above that yellow line, the classroom is damaging you. So this is extraordinary. When we started using our technology to analyze the learning environment, we found out bluntly how bad it was. And it didn't matter what else we looked at, it was always pretty bad. So then we started, as you will have heard from the panel session before, we started saying loud and clear to the kids, I'll tell you what, kids, you design the space. You know, here's a challenge, here's the space you're working in. You design it. This is in Madrid, where we gave the kids carte blanche to redesign their entire space. They put a great big sign on the door, which we'll look at in a minute, but they've got no budget at all. The interactive screen is cardboard. The 3-dimensional space in the corner is made from chicken wire and paper. The curtain here should go right across, but there isn't enough material because there was no money. So there's just a marker for where the curtain is. The head teacher here has come in because he's amazed to find children standing in front of a cardboard interactive screen, articulating what's there. But he's come in, good old Phil, because the learning in the room was better, significantly better. Any which way you measured it, they arrived on time earlier. They stayed later. Their academic results went up. Their engagement, their delight, their smiles, their collaboration. If you could measure any which way, just measure it from the mutuality of their language, all the I's and me's giving way to us and we's. The learning was better, and it's flipping cardboard. What's going on here, of course, is the kids are role-playing better learning. They've decided to rise to the challenge, and they're role-playing what better learning might be in the future. Now, I don't know how long you think their patience is going to last of pretending to be in the future when they could actually be in the future. So we gave them a bit of an incentive and we said, look, here you go, folks. Here's quite a lot more cardboard, since you seem to like cardboard, you know. And here's a space in the university. Have a go. I'm just sort of glancing sideways, so I've got all these backgrounds racked up over here, which is a nice way to use Zoom, I think. So we said, here's a space. Let me try and find you a good example of this in the tiny amount of time we've really got left. So we challenged them. We said, okay, convert this university space into something that you would want to attend as a university student. And you can see they built the entire place in cardboard and said, well, something like this, please, Chief. You know, And then these were 13 and 14-year-olds, you know, so we said, okay, if that's what you want, we'll build it. We will actually build that space for you and see how well it works. So this is learner design, full on the student agency. This isn't co-construction. We're not doing it with them. We're asking them to do the research of determining what makes great learning and just moving ahead. And here's obviously we built it for them, here it is. And this isn't unfamiliar. I mean, here's a little tiny coastal community school. I've been working in Essex, just down the road, and look at the variables in place here. Look how bright the light is. Lux levels of 500 or above. This classroom's built to 1,000. Hugely reflective, white writable surfaces, zoned spaces, the tiered seating you saw with the university athletes, the screens absolutely everywhere. And by the way, you know, when I say this is everywhere, this really is everywhere. Here's our government in the UK at the moment all went to a very posh school. Here's Eton. And you'll see just the same components falling into place there. So this is really interesting, because what's even better than doing up your own space, what's even better is being out of doors. So here's a group of children that are doing learning out of doors, they're doing maths. I'm not saying go out of doors to do gym and climbing walls, go out of doors to do your learning. And we know how good that can be, because we've seen things like, well, in the little town that I live in here, we have a thing called the Beach School, where the children, and this is run by my daughter, so I know all about it, the children come to the beach to do their outdoor learning. I'm just trying to find you a picture of the blighters. Actually, here's a group in Denmark. You wonder why the Denmark footballers are so brave. This is a primary school, and the children are climbing trees. The trees are in the middle of a dual carriageway going past the school, and there's no ropes. They just climb up there. When I said to the teachers, isn't that a bit dangerous? They said, no, there are trees everywhere. If we didn't teach them to climb trees safely, think of the danger they'd be in. So, you know, spilling our learning out of doors into the community really, really, really starts to matter. And that means we can start taking the walls down. This is Linfield Learning Village. And oh, look, I'm actually wearing that shirt. I do have more than one shirt, but in New South Wales, just outside Sydney, is a school where the kids all have an individual timetable. It's a stage, not age school. They go as fast as they like. They don't have to wait till they're 15. They want to get on with it, they can do it. And that's the sort of learning kids discovered for themselves during COVID with a whole range of technologies. Now, a few last minutes. Let me just say three things in conclusion, really, because gosh, we're so short of time. Firstly, none of this is expensive. When you move your learning out of doors, here's a professional development class I'm running for a group of teachers. When you move your learning out of doors, it's cheap. Secondly, the CO2, the TVOCs, the microparticulates, the temperature, the oxygen, everything heads towards optimal. And the beach school kids here in Brightlingsea are on the beach all the year round. You know, they're there 12 months of the year. They say famously, as others have said before them, there's no such thing as bad clothes, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. Look, here they are. Go to beachschool.org if you want to visit it. Interestingly enough, when we started bringing the outdoors indoors, when we put plant walls into 162 classrooms in Dubai, Asher Alexander was the head teacher that did all that work. The data we got back was remarkable. The CO2 was sucked down. Here's the data for academic performance. Here's the academic performance by subject. In each case, the after dramatically better than the before. So all this really, really works. And the big thing here is going right back to what I was saying at the beginning. that question, what are we going to do with technology that we were struggling to do before, goes out of the window. What comes in is the challenge of what would you like to do? Just what would you like to do with your learning? And, you know, it turns out that's a really interesting question. But I'll tell you for nothing, what kids say in answer to that question is more, faster and further. We were asking a group of children in Scotland, just after lockdown had got going. I said, hold up your 5 hands and tell me, how many days a week you think you need to come to school to still be part of the community and get some work done and still have a bestie, you know, but so you can get on with some proper work, undisturbed, really get your head down and go for it at home, maybe with others. So if you think it's 5 days, do that. If you think it's 4 days, do that. The average was 2. And we're building a school in Cork at the moment, which is modeless, doesn't really care whether you come to school or not. You're still going to be doing your project-based work with a group of others. You're still going to be collaborating online with a group of others. You're still going to be doing your international baccalaureate. Your parents could go and live in Switzerland for a month or a term or a year. You'll still be part of that school. So schools starting to mirror the employment you see all around you is coming at you like an express train. The walls of learning have got softer and they've got lower. Any place where you thought or the government thought we could box in learning has gone. Learning has escaped. And the only question for us really is, do we pick up the technology and run with it, or do we try and corral it back and get it back in the boxes it was in before? Well, I'll leave you with this lovely little box that's, you know, because teachers are still full of lovely ingenuity. This is my other daughter's school. She's head teacher down in Dorset. A reception class came into school one day. There's a box in the middle of the classroom, and they didn't know what it was. And it said on it, Robot Repair Centre. And they were, oh, that's unusual. You know, they struggled a bit to read, their only reception. And then the box started talking to them. Hello, Stephen. Glad to see you in today. How's your dog? Oh, hello, James. You're back from visiting your uncle. Did you have a good time? We're really pleased to see you back. The box seemed to know who they were and all about them. And the box said, look, I'm the robot that does all the work in school. When you go home, I do all the jobs in school that need doing, and I'm broken. So you'd better think about what all those jobs are and start building some robots to do those jobs. And of course, what the box really was there was a Bluetooth loudspeaker in the box, and my daughter was sitting there with her phone, you know, typing things, and whatever she typed in the phone, the box said. Children's imagination took them on a journey, not into the box, but into how learning might be better with all these robots they were designing at night. That's where we are. We're in that world of ingeniously trying to think what learning tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow looks like. And for me, the exciting thing about it is all those kids around the world who got no learning at all because they've got no schools. 25 million kids in Pakistan have not got 1 million teachers to teach them and haven't got 25,000 schools to be in anyway. Those kids are going to have an extraordinary chance at learning, and they are the kids who are going to be leading the charge. We're going to be tearing up our legacy systems expensively and saying, how can we do this better? They're going to say, well, I'll tell you what, we had never had a chance of doing it the way the West did it. Let's just reinvent it from scratch. And their learning will be grounded in their communities, will be relevant, will be full of deep knowledge and curiosity and ingenuity. And I cannot wait to see how good this decade's going to be. Go back to your schools and your classrooms. Start looking at the data. Start looking at as much data as you can collect. And say to yourself, how might we build the classroom of tomorrow? And I'll leave on the wall behind me the sign that's on the wall of the classroom where the kids built it, all in cardboard. And the permanent sign says, under construction. It's never going to be finished. The student's voice, their agency, their research, not their opinions, but their research into the science of learning is changing that classroom day by day, year by year. That's where we are, folks. The most fun you're ever going to have in your career. Well, the most fun you're going to have with your clothes on anyway. So with that, I'd better leave you to the football. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you so much. The last year has been difficult for many of us.
Of course.
It's really wonderful to see and to conclude today with such a positive message that technology can really improve the way children learn and the opportunities children will have in the future. That's really wonderful. I want to hand over to James just for one question. James had one question for you, Stephen, before we go to football. Spare 2 more minutes and then
listen, I'm not going to watch the football anyway. I'm a sailor, but you can ask as much as you like.
James, one question and we have to conclude.
I never get tired of hearing you speak, Stephen. Just a question with the big data. In the first round, we had Simon Walker, and he said that AI personalized teaching can undermine metacognition by kind of suggesting and preempting the next learning steps. So just interested to know your opinion on that.
Well, of course. I mean, if it's inappropriately harvested, you know, if it's trying, I mean, basically anything you do to the children is going to damage learning. Anything you do with them is going to be not so bad. And anything you give them agency to do themselves, it's going to be stellar. You know, so what you do with the AI, and one of the things you can do is, well, I mean, for example, here's a simple example. In Spain, we've said to all our parents in a group of schools I'm working with there, we've said, look, parents, you send your kids to our school. In exchange, we're going to support any course you want to do at all. So, you know, if you want to do a course on well-being, or you used to be in a retail department, but now you want to retrain as a Python programmer, or actually you want to do a degree because you're a stay-at-home parent, we'll support that. We'll pay for the courses. We'll do the whole thing. And by the way, we're running an AI engine across 2 things. One is people's adoption of those courses across the whole of Spain, actually across the whole of Europe. So we can tell you what courses is worth doing. So never mind telling you which answers are worth giving. We'll tell you which things are worth knowing, which is much more useful, you know. And also we can help you to see what others like you are doing that they find useful. You know, you think when I get in an Uber cab, you know, the driver rates me, I rate the driver, and there's a nice little algorithm that runs and influences when I should get picked up and if I should get picked up. That's going to apply to teaching and learning. But you see what happens when people take an idea and say, let's apply it to what we're already doing. You know, here's an exam question. Let's put AI into that. Oh, you've done the wrong answer. Let me give you 3 more like it. And that's utter tosh, because that's not what we want children to be good at. We want them to be good at deep knowledge, applying the knowledge, being creative and ingenious. You don't get that from AI. What you get from AI is the ability to do it better, because we give you the, you know, going back to the football thing for a minute, you know, if you look at the rugby, which I do follow, you'll see on the back of every single player, a little box on the back of their shirt. I've got one here actually. Yeah, box on the back of their shirts, that is telling you how fast they accelerate, how many passes they've helped with, what sort of speed they've gone, what distances they've covered, what their oxygen rate is in their bloodstream. I mean, just something like 10,000 data points per second sucking off the back of their shirts. We've done none of that in education, none of that, and we do need to. There's an equity issue here. You know, you sit a bunch of kids down in an exam room, and the kids on the dark, hot, badly ventilated side are going to do 5 to 7% worse than the kids on the sunny, ventilated, cool side. Now, if I was a parent, I'd go to court and say, you put my kid over here, you damaged his life chances. So we are going to have to respond to information, because it'll be the kids' information, not ours. And we'll look at the aggregates, the kids will look at theirs. Together, we can do something fabulous. But some dumb AI engine trying to make the answers a little bit harder, it's exactly the foolish thing that people would have done if they didn't have any ingenuity or imagination. Our kids have got those two things.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Greetings to the UK.
Bye now, everybody.
Bye-bye. James.
Quick summary.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been writing copious notes. Our first keynote, Kevin, was struck on the nose by the results of the poll, with so many teachers feeling they don't feel confident. And he also talked about the brain is hardwired for stories and narratives, and that we should apply that to assessment as a narrative. We had Carol at the crossroads. We had Angela talking about every child, every student having success routes. That's what they're doing in Dubai. Simon made that interesting point about AI and personalized learning undermining metacognition. We had Devin talking about American students saying they hate the rubrics and they want to learn what their friends are learning. We had Simon made the interesting point about homeschool and remote schooling be beneficial for some students. We had Carolina talking about trust and relationships and her 5 building blocks. Pirjo with her Finnish double flip, which I thought was rather good, and playful learning. We had Carolina also talking about self-paced learning, wherever you want, whenever you want, which is what Stephen was saying. And Pirjo saying a happy teacher is a good teacher. Jon, so many good points, authenticity of shared peer-to-peer learning, the fact that teachers are now doing the writing of the books rather than just people in university, and Jon on his book as well. And then finally, Stephen making that point about the golden generation, just as the children after the war produced those geniuses from the 60s, so too learning is escaped during COVID, and they will have resilience, they will be able to cope with the unexpected. And he made that very important point that this generation of children and students will be intolerant of being put back in their boxes. And it's all about learner design, student agency, and that lovely example of Linfield, and stage not age, where you move on when you're ready, not because you're in a certain classroom. And there you have it.
Thank you very much, James. Yeah, this brings us to the end of 2 days, 2 intense days, talking about the school for the future. Yesterday, we talked about which skills will be necessary in the future. How should that impact actually the curriculums? We talked about literacy teaching as a gateway skill. And today we, in great length, we talked about assessment and how can we move assessment really from something that just tells us where we have the learning gaps to something positive, constructive feedback-based assessments. And we talked about the role of the teachers and how that changes in this new world. And we ended with a very positive note from Stephen Happel. So I hope you got inspired. I hope you enjoyed the last 2 days. This is just the beginning of a conversation. Please follow us on social media, both Re.school and the Global School Alliance. We are doing many events throughout the year to bring together teachers and experts in education to stimulate a continuous communication and conversation about the future of schools. So thank you very much for joining us. And if you're in the world where the school year is coming to an end now, I'm sitting right now in Spain. Today schools finished here. I wish you a wonderful summer, and we will come back after the summer break. So thank you very much and good evening.